Chapter 32-47. Good, very good. Gong Xiaoying had a gloomy expression on his face. He swept a deep glance at Gong Jia and said coldly, "Is this the reason why you kept going back and forth to country Z without telling me?" "Father, shut up." Gong Xiaoying was furious. His shocking aura made everyone in the huge venue stop breathing. Gong Jia lowered his head guiltily and stood at the side without saying a word. He had always been in awe of Gong Xiaoying. This man was his father, as well as the founder of the Hurricane Group. Although he usually treated his son warmly, once he got angry, he would definitely turn into a raging lion. No one dared to go against him. Although he was proud, he would not go against his father's will. Yunshushi was even more displeased when she saw Gong Xiaoying berating Gong Jia in front of so many people. "Sir, this is my wedding. If you have come with your blessings, then please take a seat and witness my happiness. If you have come with hostility, then please leave this place and walk out of this door. I do not welcome you." She said the last few words with a pause between each word. Gong Xiaoying was stunned. No matter how angry he was, he could only be at a loss in front of her. "Mister?" Look at the way she addressed him. It was so distant. However, it wasn't unreasonable for them to be so distant. After all, for more than 20 years, ever since she was born, the father and daughter had never met. He had never seen her, and she had never seen him. It was inevitable for them to be distant. However, this did not stop him from being close to her. He said, "Sure, you probably don't know who I am, right?" "I know." Yunshushi took a deep breath. "Your name is Gong Xiaoying. You are Xiao Jia's father and my mother's lover. Since you know that I am your father, then why?" Gong Xiaoying was stunned. "Do I need to repeat myself?" However, Yunshushi did not hold back. Perhaps it was because Gong Xiaoying's appearance had ruined her wedding, or perhaps it was because Gong Xiaoying had reprimanded Xiao Jia in front of her. She was unhappy with him, so her tone was aggressive. "If you're carrying your blessings, I'll arrange a seat for you immediately. If you insist on destroying it, then I will ask you to leave." "Hostility?" Gong Xiaoying laughed helplessly. "You're my daughter, and I'm your father. I can't wait to dote on you, so why would I be hostile to you?" Yunshushi was shocked. She thought that he was going to give her his blessings, and her expression softened a little. However, she heard Gong Xiaoying say coldly, "But I will never allow you to be with him." After Gong Xiaoying finished speaking, his gaze fell on Wuxia, filled with hostility. She was well aware of who the he was referring to was. Yunshushi's face turned ashen. At the side, Yu looked at Gong Xiaoying and then at Gong Jia. For a moment, he had mixed feelings. According to seniority, the man in front of him was his grandfather, and also his superior. He was rumored to be the famous CEO of Hurricane Group, Gong Xiaoying. However, why didn't he feel a sense of closeness? Wuxia was silent for a moment. It was not because Gong Xiaoying's aura was too intimidating, but he had to take Yunshushi's wishes into consideration. After all, this was a matter between father and daughter. If they wanted to acknowledge each other, he could not interfere. Chapter 32-48. This man's appearance was within his expectations, yet it was also beyond his expectations. What he had expected was that the Gong family would find out about Yunshushi's existence sooner or later. When that time came, a dispute would be inevitable. What he had not expected was that he would suddenly appear at their wedding, catching them off guard. Yunshushi turned to look at Wuxia. She suddenly mustered up her courage and reached out her hand, tightly interlocking her fingers with his. She turned to face Gong Xiaoying and smiled. "Since you don't give us your blessings, then, can I ask you to leave this place?" Gong Xiaoying's face turned ugly. "Today is our wedding. I don't want anyone to ruin it. Including you." Yunshushi paused for a moment, then said, if you must acknowledge me as your daughter, then please acknowledge him as well. My husband, the man I have chosen for my entire life. If you can't acknowledge him, then I can't acknowledge you either. Gong Xiaoying's heart turned cold. He questioned her, do you know who he is? He's my husband. There's no doubt about it. He's from the Mu family. Gong Xiaoying interrupted her. You should know who caused your mother's death. I know. Since you already know, Mr. Gong, then forgive me for asking. Back then, you clearly knew where my mother was. Yun Shusher's eyes suddenly reddened. She vented all the resentment and anger in her heart. Since you knew where my mother was, since you knew about our existence, why didn't you come to find us personally? If you had come personally, such a car accident would have been avoided, right? Gong Xiaoying was at a loss for words. So, why didn't you come? Yun Shusher's voice gradually became hoarse. She asked mournfully, do you know how long my mother waited for you and waited for you? Do you know how much she suffered silently for you? Loneliness? Helplessness? Hesitation? Confusion? These were all bestowed upon her by you. When she was young, she used to see her mother sitting by the window, pruning the flowers and looking into the distance. She asked why her mother always sat by the window. His mother was always silent. Until one day, she got up from the windowsill and sat on the edge of the bed in disappointment. She was clearly smiling, but she looked like she was about to cry. I'm waiting for him. She was waiting for the man she loved to suddenly appear in her sight one day. She was waiting for the day when she sat by the window and saw him appear outside the door. He waved at her and said gently, Qingcheng, I'm late. Yun Shusher said aggressively, but why didn't you come? Is it because you have someone else you love, or is it because you are too busy with your so-called career? She was like a needle piercing him, causing him to feel unbearable pain in his heart. Gong Xiaoying closed his eyes, feeling as if his heart was bleeding. Yun Shusher said, what does this mean? This means that to you, my mother is probably not as important as glory and wealth, right? Gong Xiaoying froze. Her words only made him feel a stab in his heart. The old scar seemed to have been ruthlessly torn open again, and it was so painful that it bled non-stop. Those bloody memories appeared before his eyes again. The man staggered and couldn't stand steadily. Chapter 32:49. Mu Yaja's heart ached as he pulled her into his embrace, only to hear her continue hatefully. You don't understand how torturous it is to wait for someone. You also don't understand how hopeless it is to wait for someone who may never appear in your life. Do you know, my mother used her entire life to wait for someone? Every word was like weeping blood. Gong Xiaoying was in so much pain that he could hardly breathe. He staggered a step, his body on the verge of collapsing. Gong Jia immediately went forward to support Gong Xiaoying's arm. Heartbroken, he said, Father, sister and brother-in-law are truly in love with each other. I know how difficult it was for them to get to where they are today. Father, I hope that you won't hold on to those old grudges and give brother-in-law and yourself a chance. He used to hate the Mu family to the core, but in the face of his sister's happiness, he gave in. He also hoped that his father would give in. Gong Xiaoying swatted his hand away and questioned, give him a chance? Then, who will give me and your mother a chance? Yun Shusher froze. Gong Xiaoying glared at Mu Yaja and said coldly, the Gongs and Mus are irreconcilable enemies. Irreconcilable enemies, huh? Mu Yaja's lips curled into a smile. He reached out to pull Yun Shusher into his embrace to declare his stance. Mr. Gong, I hope that you know that the person standing before you is not only your daughter but also my wife, Mu Yaja. Similarly, she is also the woman whom I have decided to spend my life with. The reason why you hate the Mus so much is none other than Mu Sheng's interference in their relationship back then. That's why they ended up being separated forever. However, do you want to imitate him and be an executioner who breaks up lovers? Executioner? Gong Xiaoying's eyes widened in shock when he heard that. How could he be an executioner? I don't care where you stand. Since you're here, I might as well tell you where I stand. Mu Yaja looked up and met his gaze. His gaze was cold but firm. I know that the Hurricane Group is famous, and I also know that it's hard to find another family in the world that can compete with the Gong family. I'm even more aware of your strength than mine. But even so, it will not shake my determination to be with Shishir. Gong Xiaoying was stunned. Although the young man in front of him had an incomparably young and handsome face, his arrogant aura was on par with his, not the slightest bit inferior to his. As the saying goes, the younger generation will surpass the older generation. Even though the current Mu Yaja might not be able to enter his eyes with that little bit of strength, Mu Yaja still had a long way to go. However, it was hard to predict what this young man's future would be like. Mu Yaja's face was unperturbed. He held Yun Shishir's hand tightly and said nonchalantly, "If you're willing to acknowledge me, then I'll be very grateful. However, if you're unwilling to acknowledge me, then I'm prepared to be enemies with the Hurricane Group." After a pause, he said meaningfully, "I only hope that you're prepared to repeat the same mistakes." Repeat the same mistakes? Gong Xiaoying could not understand the meaning behind his words. Mu Yaja curled his lips and said word by word, "You don't want your biological daughter to hate you like how you hate the Muse, do you? Mr. Gong." Gong Xiaoying stood rooted to the ground as if he had been struck by lightning. Chapter 3250. You don't want your biological daughter to hate you as much as you hate the Muse, do you? Yu finally could not hold it in any longer. He stood in front of Yun Shishir and told Gong Xiaoying, "My daddy and mommy are truly in love. Gong Xianxia, you can't really bear to break up daddy and mommy, right? Mommy has set her sights on daddy, and Xiao Yichen and I have our sights set on daddy, too. I don't want to lose him because of your interference." Gong Xiaoying lowered his eyes and his gaze fell on him. There was a hint of surprise in his eyes. Suddenly, he recognized this adorable little milk bun. Previously, when his men had gathered information about Yun Shishir, there was information about these two children. Genes were such a miraculous thing. Back then, Mu Qingqing had given birth to a pair of children for him, and her daughter had given birth to a pair of adorable grandchildren for him, too. At that time, when he looked at these two photos, he was filled with emotions. It turned out that he even had grandchildren. These two little lads were really adorable. Their skin was fair and tender, and their eyes were watery. He could vaguely see the shadow of Mu Qingqing in them. These were his two grandchildren. One was Yun Tianyu, and the other was Mu Yichen. Yu looked at him. In front of such a powerful man, he did not show any respect. His expression was calm and composed as he looked up at him. Xiao Yichen looked at him timidly. He knew that this man was his mommy's father and his grandfather. However, he could not feel any closeness at all. "Mr. Gong, please think about it carefully. Is hatred so important? Is it so important that even mommy's happiness can be sacrificed?" Gong Xiaoying's lips trembled violently. He looked up and glanced at Yun Shishir. The woman standing in front of him was the daughter he had been longing for, but now, she had an unfamiliar expression on her face. In her eyes, there was hostility and probing, but more than that, there was fear. Of course, she wanted to acknowledge him. But, towards him, how could she not hate him? However, what she said was not wrong. If he had been able to find Mu Qingqing personally back then, perhaps there wouldn't have been so many accidents. Furthermore, there was no eternal separation between heaven and man. She was right. However, this didn't mean that the feud between the Gong and Mu families could be written off just like that. For so many years, he had not been able to walk out of this place. It was not something that could be done with just a few words from her. Gong Xiaoying sized up Mu Yaja, who was standing in front of him. Such a young man, handsome and charismatic. The younger generation will surpass us in time. She could tell that this was an outstanding and extraordinary man, one who was not inferior to her in any way. He knew very well that such a man would definitely be able to protect his daughter and make her happy for the rest of her life. It could also be seen that he had deep feelings for his daughter. However, he could not convince himself to accept such a man as his son-in-law. Gong Xiaoying's thoughts were in a mess. He suddenly felt a headache. His mind was in a mess. He suddenly turned around and took a deep breath. Holding his forehead, he walked away in a lonely manner. His retreating figure looked even more bleak and desolate. Gong Jia chased after him and wanted to support him. However, Gong Xiaoying pushed him away slowly and said in a low voice, "Let me think about it alone." "Father," he wanted to say something. Gong Xiaoying raised his hand to stop him and sighed. "You don't have to say anything." Chapter 32:51. After Gong Xiaoying's departure, there was a brief silence before the wedding proceeded as planned. None of the guests knew what had happened earlier and merely treated it as an unexpected interlude during the wedding. It was impossible for them to know Gong Xiaoying's identity. Naturally, they did not know that the person who had left the venue dejectedly just now was Gong Xiaoying, the founder of Hurricane Group. Although Gong Jia was feeling conflicted, he quickly put those unpleasant matters to the back of his mind. When the ceremony ended, it was time for the toast. Yunshishi changed into a red gown and walked down the hall with Mu Yaja to toast everyone. At this segment, Mu Yaja naturally could not escape from being forced to drink at this rare opportunity. However, why else would he specially choose Jiang Shen and Lu Jinyu to be his groomsmen? Not to mention Qin Zhou and Lu Jinyu, Jiang Shen, who had the worst alcohol tolerance among the three, could drink half a liter of white wine with his eyes closed. During the toast, the business partners of Xingyu Financial Group, who usually had business dealings with Mu Yaja, intended to force him to drink. These were all CEOs with extraordinary backgrounds, and some of them were on good terms with Mu Yaja in private. Of course, it would be inappropriate for him to refuse. However, at this time, the alcohol tolerance of these three groomsmen came in handy. Mu Linfeng and Mu Yancheng sat among the guests, feeling uneasy as if they were sitting on pins. They had also received the wedding invitation. Mu Yaja said that, after all, they were a family and were blood-related. Since it was his wedding, he had to send them an invitation. Naturally, whether they came or not was their business and had nothing to do with him. Initially, Mu Linfeng thought that this wedding was probably a trap. However, after thinking about it carefully, Mu Yaja valued Yunshishi so much that he would definitely not cause any trouble at the wedding. Hence, they went as promised. However, at the venue, they saw an extremely luxurious wedding. Mu Linfeng was especially upset. The most unpleasant part was none other than the wedding venue. Among the VIPs, some were the country's political leaders, and some were the big bosses of financial groups. Among them, there were a few familiar faces that they had just met. Recently, the Mu Group's capital chain had a gap. Hence, Mu Linfeng was in a terrible fix. Mu Yancheng was even thinking of ways to rope in some investors to alleviate this difficult situation. However, he was rejected several times. When he finally managed to contact the main body, the other party said that they had already established a partnership with other financial groups and did not have the capital to invest in the Mu Group. When Mu Linfeng arrived at the wedding venue and met with these investors, he felt even more awkward. It turned out that these financial groups that had been on good terms with the Mu Group had been roped in by the Xingyu Financial Group. This Mu Yaja was really ruthless. No wonder he was so disdainful when he left the Mu Group back then. It turned out that he had already secretly laid out a way out. After the Xingyu Financial Group went public, there were a series of attacks on the Mu Group. However, other than that, he did not leave them any way out and took such drastic measures. Was he trying to shut the Mu Group down? Now, what was the purpose of inviting them to the wedding? Did he want them to witness with their own eyes that, even after leaving the Mu Group, he could still achieve glory on his own? In contrast to the Xingyu Financial Group's glory, it made the Mu Group look even more down and out. Chapter 3252. Mu Yancheng felt even more indignant inside. On the one hand, he was jealous of Mu Yaja's talent. Even though he had left the Mu Group, he did not lose everything. In fact, the glory that he had gained was even greater than before. On the other hand, he looked back at him. He loved Meng Qingxue so much, but his marriage with Meng Qingxue was not something he could take for granted. So what if he became the head of the Mu family? He was still a puppet. No matter how big or small, he had to act according to Mu Linfeng's wishes. By the time Mu Yaja brought Yun Shishir to their table for a toast, all the guests at the table stood up excitedly. Only Mu Linfeng and Mu Yancheng remained seated sullenly. They looked uneasy, a little awkward, and more than that, uncomfortable. They looked at Mu Yaja again and saw a calm smile on his face. Did he expect that a toast would be enough to erase all enmity with a smile? When Mu Yaja saw Mu Linfeng, his lips curled into a smile as he said lightly, "Second uncle, you're here." His attitude wasn't arrogant, but he wasn't very respectful either. His respect for him was limited to calling him second uncle. Only then did Mu Linfeng stand up with a glass of wine in his hand. He glanced at him and then at Yun Shishir. He wanted to force a smile, but in the end, he could only squeeze out a sinister expression. It was not a smile, but it was also not a smile. It was especially awkward. "Congratulations." He said this and then gloomily raised his glass and downed the wine in one gulp. He thought to himself, "This lad is still giving me face. He didn't skip my table." When Mu Yancheng saw Mu Linfeng stand up for a toast, he reluctantly stood up with a glass of wine and said indifferently, "Second brother, I wish you a happy marriage." Similarly, he downed the wine in one gulp. The two of them sat down in silence, not saying a single extra word. In their eyes, Mu Yaja was undoubtedly flaunting his prowess. But in reality? A certain black-bellied man was indeed flaunting his prowess. He invited them to the wedding because he was certain that the two would not fall out due to the occasion. Since they were willing to come, they would also give him face. However, Mu Yaja's motive was not simple. There were many VIPs and business partners present. He also wanted to let them see the strength of the Xingyu Financial Group. Selfishly, he also hoped that the Mu Group would not make any moves against him in the future. "Second uncle, Yancheng, since you're here, I'd like to express my gratitude. Let all the unpleasant things that happened between you and the Mu family fade away with the wind." Mu Yaja poured another glass of wine and toasted him. The corners of Mu Linfeng's lips twitched for a long time before he had no choice but to stand up and force a smile. "Yaja, second uncle, of you. Look at your glorious achievements now, second uncle is happy for you." Mu Yancheng was indignant, but he still stood up. Jianghu walked over and looked at him with disdain. He filled his glass to the brim and said indifferently, "Second young Master Mu, today is our chief's big day. Since it's a rare gathering, let's eat and drink well." When Mu Yancheng heard this, he felt as if he had swallowed a fly. Eat and drink well? He was already giving face by not spitting it out. This Jianghu was really asking for a beating. Mu Linfeng deliberated for a long time before he suddenly said, "Yaja, it's just nice. It's rare to see you, so I'd like to discuss something with you." Chapter 3253. He had wanted to talk to Mu Yaja about the Mu family in front of everyone. Now that he had been rebuffed by such a casual remark, he felt extremely embarrassed. After Mu Yaja and Yun Shishir had left, Mu Linfeng was still unable to catch his breath. He sat in his seat with an ashen face. This brat had grown wings now. He even dared to refute his words. However, he did not think about how he had tried so hard to drive Mu Yaja out of the Mu family, leaving no room for negotiation. Now, it was simply wishful thinking for him to get any benefits from Mu Yaja. The people sitting at the same table as him were the directors of several multinational consortiums. When they heard this, they smiled and said, "Second Mu, today is CEO Mu's big day. What business do you have that you have to talk about on the table? Don't tell me it's about the Mu Group's recent shortage of funds?" Wang Qianshi, the director of Xinhua Financial Group, laughed and said, "I heard from my assistant some time ago that someone from the Mu family came to see me. Second Mu, is it about this matter?" "Huh. How could the Mu family have a shortage of funds?" Another man, whose background even Mu Linfeng did not know, was actually on the same level as Wang Qianshi. He laughed and said, "Mr. Wang, you haven't been in the country for so many years. Don't you know? The Mu family is the wealthiest family in the capital. The consortium manages hundreds of millions of assets. How could there be a shortage of funds?" Mu Linfeng could not express his bitterness. He was holding back his anger but had nowhere to vent it. That's right. The Mu Group used to be rich and powerful. Its capital pool managed hundreds of millions of assets. It used to be glorious. However, these funds were controlled by several directors of the consortium. When Mu Yaja left, these shareholders quickly withdrew their shares and took hundreds of billions of assets with them to the Xinyu Financial Group. Now, the Mu Group only had a reputation. However, only Mu Linfeng knew what it was exactly. It was already considered good if the Mu Group's capital pool could have a few billion in funds now. The company had a pile of bad debts and countless old debts. There were so many assets under his name that were crying piteously for financing, but there was a gap in the capital chain. Every day the project was put on hold, the losses would increase by tens of millions. Now, he was already heavily in debt and could not make ends meet. Now, they could only rely on the medical industry to survive, but they didn't know how long they could last. Many projects became non-performing assets and were forcibly purchased by the state. On the surface, the Mu family was still a glamorous and wealthy family, but no one knew how difficult it was for Mu Linfeng to maintain this reputation. However, he could not admit defeat, nor could he spread the news that Mu Group was no longer what it used to be and was insolvent. If he did that, the few shareholders who were originally guarding Mu Group would definitely leave when they saw that Mu Group was no longer as powerful as it used to be. In previous years, Mu Yaja had been the one to lead the board of directors. The meetings were all about investment and development in various fields. Now, in addition to constantly reporting bad debts, Mu Linfeng was also racking his brains to appease the board members' anxious emotions and construct an ideal investment direction for them. However, no matter how perfect the blueprint was, it was just empty praise. The Mu Group had really lost its momentum. Mu Linfeng had also thought that if not, he might as well thicken his skin and simply invite Mu Yaja back to take charge of the overall situation. However, he could not swallow his pride and did not dare to act rashly. He was afraid that Mu Yaja would be ambitious and take over the Mu Group in one fell swoop. Chapter 3254. Mu Yancheng also had a rough idea of the Mu Group's current situation, but he was not as capable or smart as Mu Yaja. If he had half of Mu Yaja's business talent, perhaps he would be able to lead the Mu Group out of this crisis. Just like back then, when Mu Sheng was unable to recover from the setback caused by the Gong family, Mu Yaja took over the position of CEO and quickly took control of the situation. After a few years of incompetence, the Mu Group regained its glory. However, he was not Mu Yaja and did not have the same brain as him. He did not know how he managed to turn the tide back then. Mu Linfeng was thoroughly disappointed in him. He was too confident back then and thought that the Mu Group could continue to prosper under his control even without Mu Yaja. Alas, he was too conceited and lost everything now. Who else could he count on in the Mu Group? Mu Shumin? Or Mu Yancheng? They were all good-for-nothings. When the wedding was over and Mu Yancheng helped Mu Linfeng out of the venue, Mu Linfeng slowly turned around and looked at the luxurious Yunshan Shuri villa. He could not help but feel sorrow in his heart. It seemed that he was wrong back then. Of all things, she should not have schemed against Mu Yaja. She should not have ruined the Mu group's great foundation because of a single mistake. If Mu Yaja had not left the Mu group back then, it would be logical for him to retire and live out his remaining years in comfort. However, he was too paranoid back then. He was paranoid about having all that vanity, glory, power, and desire. Under such desires, he made such a decision. Sigh. Mu Linfeng let out a regretful sigh as tears welled up in his eyes. He said hoarsely, "Yancheng, if only you had half of that lad's talent, it would be good, good." Mu Yancheng instantly felt uncomfortable when he heard that. Even when he became the head of the Mu family, he still could not escape the fate of being compared to Mu Yaja. "Second uncle, why are you sighing like that again? You don't understand, you don't understand." Mu Linfeng thought of the predicament the Mu group was in right now. There were all sorts of matters that had no head or tail, and there was no good way out or retreat. Instantly, he felt exhausted. He waved his hand repeatedly as tears streamed down his face. "I only hope that the Mu group doesn't fall into my hands." Mu Yancheng was shocked to hear that. "How can that be?" "Second uncle, what do you mean by that? You should know what kind of situation Mu group is in now. If we can't find a way out, Mu group will be finished. Even if Mu group's capital chain is broken, don't we still have the medical industry?" Mu Yancheng comforted him. "The Mu group's annual revenue from the medical industry is considerable, so you don't have to worry about it. Mu group is losing money every day. If this continues, the medical industry will collapse. What I'm most afraid of is that if we keep wasting time like this, one day, the Mu group will finally be unable to do anything. At that time, that brat will take action and forcibly purchase the medical industries under the Mu group's name. At that time, the Mu group would be doomed forever. The Mu family, the richest family in the capital, will also become history." Mu Yancheng was frightened when he heard that. He said indignantly, "How can Xingyu Financial Group be so powerful? Can they casually take out tens of billions? Back then, I underestimated him too much." Chapter 3255. After Mu Yaja and Yun Shishir left the wedding venue, the remaining matters were naturally handed over to Lu Jinyu and Jiang Shen to take care of. Gong Jia also stayed behind to take care of it. Yun Shishir initially wanted to stay behind to entertain the guests, but Yu said, "Mommy, leave the rest to us. As for you and Daddy, just enjoy your wedding night." Yun Shishir couldn't help but blush. Gong Jia knocked him on the head and chided, "Do you know what's going on with the wedding night? Don't just talk about it." "Of course I know." Yu raised his hands and gave him a thumbs up. He smiled meaningfully and said, "Isn't it just that?" "Oh. Uncle." Gong Jia was speechless. She felt helpless and touched at the same time. Since they had said so, she would let go of everything and properly enjoy her newlywed life. At night, she took a shower and walked into the room. The wedding dress she had taken off lay quietly on the bed. She sat on the edge of the bed, picked up the wedding dress, and gently stroked it. Her heart was filled with satisfaction. She was so happy. So happy that it was a little out of this world. This man always surprised her time and time again. This wedding had touched her greatly. Hence, even though the wedding was over, she was still immersed in the bliss of being a newlywed, so much so that she didn't realize that the man's footsteps were quietly approaching her from behind. Mu Yaja hugged her from behind and gently rested his chin on her shoulder. He asked calmly, "What are you looking at?" Yun Shishir looked up and met his gentle gaze. For a moment, her heart softened. "Why do I feel like today is like a dream?" "A dream?" "Yeah." Yun Shishir said a little embarrassedly, "I feel like I'm too happy. I'm so happy that I feel like I'm detached from reality. It's like I'm in a dream." Because of her happiness, her smile became sweet and moving. Her face was flushed red, making people want to kiss her. When Mu Yaja heard this, he felt that her words were extremely interesting. Why would I give you such an illusion? I never thought that I would have such a dreamy wedding. The next second, Wuxia hugged her waist and pinned her on the bed. His tall body was on top of hers, and his arms were propped on either side of her. His large palms gently caressed her hair as he studied her clean face. He lowered his head and gently kissed her on the lips. At first, it was just a light kiss, but gradually, he was not satisfied with such a light kiss. The tip of his tongue nimbly pried open her lips, and he wanted to go deeper. Unspoken also hugged his shoulders and responded to him shyly and passionately. The two of them continued to kiss until the kiss ended. Her breathing was slightly hurried, but she saw a hint of playfulness in the man's eyes. He asked meaningfully, "Now, do you still think it's a dream?" Wuxia kissed her lips gently again. His large palm reached into her bathrobe and he smiled even more devilishly. "Do you still not feel that it's real?" His large palm clasped her shoulders and pulled her bathrobe down to half her shoulders. His handsome face buried in her neck as he continued to ignite her. Unspoken's body arched up sensitively, and her gaze gradually became beautiful. Wuxia pecked her cheek gently and said seductively, "My dear, there's a saying that a moment of sex is worth 1,000 gold. Have you heard of it?" Her face burned even hotter. Chapter 3256. Madam, the night is long. Tonight is our wedding night. Let's not let this precious night go to waste, okay? Wuxia suddenly leaned over to her ear and sucked on her earlobe with his thin lips. His warm breath made her shiver. She was about to beg for mercy when the man sucked on her earlobe and said slowly, "You don't know how long I've been waiting for this moment." After a pause, he suddenly smiled and said, "I've been waiting for it even in my dreams." This sentence caused the temperature of her entire body to rise in an instant. Unspoken's face was extremely red. She looked into his eyes shyly, feeling touched and shy. We're already married. It's time to change the way you address me." He reminded her that now that they had held a wedding and he had held a coronation ceremony for her in front of everyone, she was already his legal wife. Unspoken then realized it. She blushed and immediately corrected herself, "Hubby, yeah, I'm here." As Wuxia said this, he was very patient and didn't move. As if she knew what he was waiting for, Unspoken pursed her lips and reached out her hand. Because of her nervousness, her fingertips were trembling slightly. She gently clasped one end of the collar of his bathrobe, and then slowly removed it for him. This was the first time in her life that she had taken the initiative to serve him. She instantly felt that her breathing was faintly hot. Wuxia was very satisfied with her initiative. He kissed her lightly from time to give her encouragement. Unspoken suppressed her guilty conscience and removed his bathrobe. She hugged his shoulders and gently kissed his shoulder. The warm breath of her lips brushed against his skin. It was as if there was an electric current that quickly spread to his limbs and bones. It was just a kiss, but it easily ignited him. No matter how determined a man was, he couldn't control himself. He pulled over her car and held her waist. With a twist, he changed their positions and helped her sit up. The sky and earth spun. She suddenly realized that she had changed her position. She was shocked. The man gently encouraged her. "Tonight, you're up there, huh?" Unspoken understood his motive. Her face was like a cloud of fire that was about to burst into flames. In bed, he rarely used this position. In fact, he had been coveting it for a long time. However, because of her reserved nature, he was worried that she would be shy. Every time he wanted to get her on top, he wanted to enjoy her complete seduction. However, in the end, it was all for naught. This time, he decided to be forceful. Using such a posture, he took possession of her without any explanation. In the room, warmth lingered, charming and gentle. He had taken her twice. Initially, she wanted to continue, but she was exhausted and sleepy. She pushed him and said coquettishly, didn't you say that you're leaving for your honeymoon tomorrow? You're so tired, what if you can't get up? No. Wuxia still wanted it. Madam, I haven't touched you in a long time. I want you, but, what if I can't get out of bed tomorrow? She almost blurted it out. It was only when she saw the playful look in the man's eyes that she suddenly realized what nonsense she had said. She bit her lip shyly and glared at him unhappily. However, the man said, if you can't get out of bed, I'll carry you onto the plane. You. Stop fooling around. Chapter 32:57. Time to sleep. Since she was unwilling to do so, he did not force her. He restrained himself from thinking about this matter and laid down beside her. However, he was still holding her in his arms. Even though he had stopped, his large palms were still moving up and down her body, unwilling to let go. Yunshursher hugged his large palm and said coquettishly, "Stop moving." As if to change the topic, she asked, "Where have you booked this honeymoon trip?" "It's a secret." However, the man pretended to be mysterious. "You'll know tomorrow." "What?" Yunshursher's curiosity was overflowing. Her anticipation for the honeymoon trip was no less than her anticipation for the wedding. Now that the wedding was over, she had been racking her brains to guess where the honeymoon trip would be. The Maldives? However, since she had already been there the last time, there was no point in going again. Italy? The Czech Republic? This didn't seem to be this man's usual style. The more he didn't tell her, the more curious she became. As a result, all the sleepiness in her body disappeared in an instant. She hugged his arm and asked coquettishly, "Tell me, where are we going on our honeymoon trip? At least give me something to look forward to." "If I don't tell you, you won't look forward to it?" he asked back. She choked and shook her head. No, little fool." The man smiled. His large palm stroked her hair gently and said, "Be good, don't think too much. Wait until tomorrow, and you will naturally know." "Oh." Yunshursher pouted unhappily. Clearly, she couldn't stop her imagination from running wild. She suddenly asked again, "How many days will you be gone? Can you at least tell me? You can stay for as long as you want." Yunshursher was puzzled. "What about you?" "Of course I'll be with you." "Something's wrong. You're actually willing to leave Yueyao behind. When the time comes, don't expect your daughter to cry when you're in a foreign country." Wuxia frowned. "I won't." Crying? How could he possibly cry? However, he was a little reluctant to leave Yueyao behind on their honeymoon, but it was a little unrealistic to bring his daughter along. He took the honeymoon trip very seriously. After all, there was rarely any private space between them. From the very beginning, Yu and Xiao Yichen were sandwiched between them. It wasn't that he found them annoying, but there were times when he didn't even have the chance to enjoy their time together. Therefore, he wanted to take advantage of this honeymoon trip to enjoy the world of the two of them. Yunshursher buried her face in his chest and asked quietly, "If I go for a month, what about the company?" She raised her head and looked at him. "The company is so busy now. If you don't come back for a month, the board of directors will be in chaos, right? Don't worry about them." Wuxia continued, "I've already taken care of the company's affairs in advance. When I'm not around, Jianghu and Jianghu will take care of it. As for you, be good and come with me on our honeymoon trip. Don't worry so much." Yunshursher muttered, "I'm just afraid that the board of directors will talk about me behind your back and confuse you. As a CEO who loves his job, you won't care about the company and only care about me every day. Why aren't you?" Chapter 32:58. You. Yunshursher chuckled and glared at him. Suddenly, she smiled coquettishly and hugged his waist, leaning on his chest. "That's great." It's rare to be able to enjoy some alone time with no worries and no need to worry about being disturbed by others. That's great. Wuxia smiled and pinched her nose affectionately. I promised you that I'll give you the best. She smiled sweetly and rested her head on his arm domineeringly, falling asleep quietly. The next morning, a certain man woke her up in a special way. He coaxed her to get out of bed, washed up, and set off with her. Their luggage was packed early in the morning, and the plane was a private jet. The weather was perfect. When they set off, the sky was clear and boundless. Sitting in the plane, looking out the window, the sky was clear and blue through the snow-white clouds. It was only when the plane landed at the airport and arrived at the destination that she found out where the first stop of her honeymoon trip was. She transferred to a helicopter until a beautiful pink beach came into view. She was shocked and subconsciously blurted out, "Hubble Island? You know about it?" "Of course." Xianxia was thrilled. She hugged his arm and said in surprise, "How did you know that I've always dreamed of coming here for a vacation?" Hubble Island was the most famous resort. On the island, there was a beach that was 3 miles long. The water was clear and the sand was soft. Along the beach, there were 25 colorful villas that formed a luxurious resort. The villas were a combination of Monaco, Balinese, and many other styles. It was also the best diving resort. Pink was the most romantic color for young girls. However, it was often difficult to associate pink with the beach. However, in the Bahamas, like a paradise, there was a beautiful pink beach hidden away. The Bahamas was made up of more than 700 coral islands. Therefore, the surface of the islands was covered with a layer of coral powder and mud. Looking from afar, it was a sea of pink and bright colors, especially at dusk. Against the backdrop of the beach, the sunset scenery was like a dream, like a paradise on earth. It was so beautiful that it was suffocating. When they arrived, it was almost dusk. Looking from afar, the beach, the sea, and the sky seemed to gradually change color, from pink to blue, and from blue to pink. The beach reflected the sea, and the sea reflected the sky. For a moment, it was impossible to tell where the end was and where the horizon was. Looking down from the helicopter, one could see the shallow seawater with waves constantly sweeping onto the beach. Even the seawater seemed to be dyed pink. It was especially beautiful and dazzling. Wuxia had the entire island under his control, so he didn't have to worry about being disturbed by anyone. Now, this place belonged to them. I'm starting to regret it. Xianxia muttered, "Why didn't we think of this when we took our wedding photos? If you want to film it, you can film it now. Even if she doesn't wear a wedding dress, she will still be very beautiful." Xianxia smiled. "Yes. That's good too. It'll be a souvenir. But, did you bring a photographer?" "Of course I did." Wuxia smiled mysteriously. "Even if it's a honeymoon, we have to make memories." This man was so considerate. He even brought a photographer with him. She was touched by his thoughtfulness. She hugged him and looked at the sea until the land slowly approached. That breathtaking beauty was also getting closer. Chapter 32:59. When they landed on the island, Wuxia held Xianxia's hand as they got off the helicopter. The local crew had been waiting for them at the helipad for a long time. He quickly came up to them, leading a white horse. Wuxia walked up and exchanged a few words with him. Suddenly, he turned around and asked, "Madam, shall we go to the beach to enjoy the sea breeze?" "Now?" "Yeah. There's still some time before dinner. Why don't we go to the beach to enjoy the scenery? Haven't you always wanted to see the pink beach?" Wuxia looked at the sky again. "The scenery is the best now. It won't be too hot." "Sure." Xianxia took another look at the white horse and asked curiously, "Do you want to ride a horse?" "Yeah." Xianxia was a little nervous. She immediately said, "I've never learned how to ride a horse." Won't I fall? I will. He had learned how to ride a horse since he was young. Although he wasn't proficient in it, he was very familiar with riding a horse. The crew walked up and wanted to help her onto the horse, but Wuxia stopped him. How could this petty man bear to see his lovely wife being touched by other people? Even if he had to help her onto the horse, he had to do it himself. Unspoken couldn't do anything about him. She looked at the local crew who was smiling uneasily and returned a smile. When Wuxia saw this, he was slightly displeased. In the future, you're not allowed to smile at other men. For a moment, she didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Hubby, do you have to do this? Of course. He didn't allow her to explain. He walked over and helped her onto the horse. When she was seated properly, he held the saddle and got onto the horse. He sat behind her and hugged her in his arms. Unspoken's heart skipped a beat. She couldn't help but recall that when she was filming Lethal Beauty, there were also scenes where she had to ride a horse. But, most of the actors these days were noble. Even if she volunteered to learn how to ride a horse, it was easy for her to fall down. So, the film crew didn't dare to neglect her. As a result, most of the scenes were shot while the horse was still. What was still fresh in people's minds was a scene in which she rode a horse and rushed to the imperial city at lightning speed. She held the reins in one hand and the whip in the other as she galloped all the way. But in reality, during the filming, the horse was stationary. Her body was moving up and down, pretending to be at the very least. As for the scenery along the way, it was all done with post-production special effects with a green screen around her. She was still a little worried that it would seem a little out of place, but the post-production special effects were quite impressive. The feeling it created was exactly the same as riding a horse in real life. However, even though he had ridden a horse, the horse did not move. When he first sat on it, he felt that the saddle was a little hard. Wuxia held the reins, his slender legs clamped down on the horse's belly, and the white horse began to move slowly. The horse had undergone proper training and Wuxia knew how to command it. Hence, the horse was very obedient under his control. It's so obedient, so obedient. Unspoken was a little surprised. So this was what riding a horse really looked like. For a moment, she was eager to give it a try. Is it very difficult to learn how to ride a horse? It's not difficult. Then I want to learn too. Wuxia saw her expectant face and his lips curved into a smile. I'll teach you tomorrow. Really? She had thought that a certain man was worried that she would fall and forbid her from learning. Chapter 3260. Wuxia and Unspoken went abroad for their honeymoon. On the other hand, after Lu Jinyu and Jianghu were done with the wedding ceremony, Gong Jia suggested to Yu that since Yuyao was being taken care of, he planned to make a trip back to the Gong family. Yu was silent for a long time. Then, he suddenly said, "Uncle, can I go back to the Gong family with you?" You? Yes. Yu smiled and said calmly, "The last time I met Grandpa at the wedding, I was his grandson. This time, I'm going back to the Gong family as a core member of the Hurricane Group." Gong Jia was shocked. "Father didn't realize your identity the last time. That's because Uncle has protected my identity well." Yu smiled elegantly. "But I'm worried that Grandpa won't be able to let go of his hatred and won't tolerate Daddy. I'm afraid that he'll use underhanded means to deal with Daddy. When that time comes, the situation won't be too awkward." "So, you want to go back personally to persuade him?" Gong Jia smiled. "It's useless. Your grandfather is a very stubborn man. Once he's made a decision, he won't change it." "But he hasn't made any decision yet, has he?" Yu asked. "If he had made a decision, he would have dealt with Daddy long ago." Gong Jia frowned. Yu's identity in the Hurricane Group had always been a mystery. Previously, he had made a name for himself with a blueprint. The core members of the Deva I project had accidentally discovered that the blueprint, which was originally used to make toys, was so precise that it could be used in the development of weapons. What was even more shocking was that he had broken into the Hurricane Group's dark web. The dark web, as the name suggested, was a black market on the internet. This world was covered by the internet. On the surface, the online media had a wide range of coverage. In fact, there was also the dark web. From small gun deals to major ones like human trafficking and murdering people, there were all kinds of strange things that could be done. As for the dark web, it was also known as the deep web. As the name implied, it was a deep web that was not accessible to the general public. Usually, the Tieba, Weibo, and major media websites that people visited were all superficial networks. The deep web was a web page that could not be searched by regular search engines. The IP address was well hidden. If the internet world was described as an iceberg, then the web pages that people usually touched were only the tip of the iceberg. The remaining 90% were hidden in the deep sea. Most people would never be able to touch them in their lifetime. The number of domain names on the dark web was more than 1,000 times more than the surface web. The first level was the shallowest and could be accessed through a specific browser. The content was some pornography and other unknown content. The second level was not so easy to enter. It could only be entered through a specific invitation method. There were all kinds of evil forces and terrorist organizations. Very few people had ever explored the third floor. It was said that it hid some classified documents that could not be exposed to the light of day. Yu found out about the existence of the dark web in this world by chance. He entered a string of domain names. Coincidentally, the domain name was a human trafficking dark web. On the web, there were pictures of different races and the price of different organs. Chapter 3261. Yu had never thought that there was such a dark side to the world. It was filled with so many heinous transactions. Hence, he used his technology to hack into other dark websites. Only then did he realize that such dark websites were numerous. One of the dark websites was a social network that specialized in selling women. On the web page, there were many pictures of women being tied up and raped. He even found out that there was an underground club in another dark website. This club kidnapped the victims and allowed the rich and powerful to pay for their entertainment. In a certain market, such transactions were legal. However, such an illegal website had never been shown to the world. Some of the victims were willing. Because their families were poor, they were willing to sacrifice themselves to save their families from starvation. Some of the victims were kidnapped and taken away. Their photos were published on the web and the employer would quote a price. The highest bidder would get it. The organization would then send people to kidnap the victims for their entertainment. When Yu saw such a dark side of the world, he was terrified. At the same time, he thought, I can't let my mommy be in such danger. Everyone had a sense of danger. Yu's sense of danger was especially strong. He swore that he would make himself stronger. That was until he accidentally hacked into the Hurricane Group's dark website. He intercepted a confidential document sent by a few high-ranking members of the Hurricane Group. When he opened the document, he saw a blueprint. This blueprint was the design of the parts used by the Hurricane Group to develop the Heaven's Eye project. There were thousands of such parts on the web. The Hurricane Group wanted to set up a heaven's net around the world. However, such a heaven's net was only the tip of the iceberg. Yu was interested in this blueprint. In his opinion, if this blueprint was redesigned, it might be able to be used to make toys. Hence, what happened next happened. The first to discover that the dark website of the Hurricane Group had been hacked was Gong Jia. He suspected that it was the work of a top hacker. The confidential blueprint was also stolen and disappeared. However, a few days later, the redesigned blueprint was uploaded to the dark web. Gong Jia realized that the blueprint was so precise that it made his hair stand on end. The altered data came from an IP address. Following this IP address, Hurricane also hacked into Yu's computer. However, he didn't find any useful information. When Yu found out that her network had been hacked by Hurricane, she started fighting with a few of Hurricane's top hackers. When Gong Jia took this drawing to the headquarters of Sky Eye, several designers were shocked and thought that the person who designed this drawing was definitely a genius that was hard to come by in 100 years. Therefore, the Hurricane Group extended an olive branch to him, but they did not expect that such a blueprint would come from a 6-year-old child. When Gong Xiaoying found out about this, he still thought it was a fantasy. As the world's #1 firearms group, the Hurricane Group had seen all kinds of situations, but they had never seen such a young but powerful child. Such a blueprint was too precise. Even with Leji's advanced manufacturing technology, it was impossible to create such a toy. When Yu first joined the Hurricane Group, she was not a core member. Chapter 3262. Secondly, Hurricane had its reservations as well. After all, he was only a 6-year-old child. If he were to be officially included as a core developer, it would surely attract unnecessary trouble. Later, when Yu officially joined the Hurricane Group, Yu did not agree to meet him and rejected him outright. Gong Xiaoying clicked his tongue in wonder. In the entire Hurricane Group, whenever he wanted to see someone, which one of them wouldn't be in awe? However, this young man was the only one who was proud and arrogant, allowing himself to do as he pleased. Gong Xiaoying found it interesting, too. This time, Yu wanted to take the initiative to meet Gong Xiaoying, but he had a selfish motive. Mommy and Daddy are very happy together. Yu told Gong Jia, even though I'm protecting Mommy wholeheartedly, I've seen how they've been through ups and downs along the way. That's why I approve of him. I approve that this man has the right to be Mommy's husband. Mommy loves him, too. I don't want Grandpa to make the same mistake and repeat the tragedy of the past. After a pause, Yu continued, that's why I want to meet him and talk to him about this matter. What kind of card is this? A family card? Gong Jia asked half-jokingly. I guess so. Alright, I'll bring you back. Gong Jia suddenly added, but you have to be mentally prepared. The Gong family isn't a place where you can enter and leave as you wish. Yu laughed arrogantly and said nonchalantly, the one who has to be mentally prepared is him, right? These words were undoubtedly Yu's unique style. Arrogant and overbearing. He actually resembled the high-spirited Gong Jia when he was young. Gong Jia said, I've already sent someone to send Yun Yecheng back to the Gong family. We'll take the cargo ship back. Alright. Once everything was ready, Yun Tianyu instructed Mu Yichen to stay at home to take care of Yueyao. Even if Mu Yaja and Yun Shishir were not around, with Hua Jin and the nanny, Yueyao would definitely be well taken care of. Gong Jia would also send people to protect them in secret, so there was no need to worry about Mu Yichen and Yueyao's safety. The next day, Yu left with Gong Jia. This was Yu's first time sitting on a cargo ship. It was such a huge ship, carrying hundreds of tons of goods. The ship was as tall as a mountain. Just by standing at the port and looking at it from afar, Yu was already in awe. When they boarded the port, Gong Jia showed Yu around the cargo ship. Yu felt a chill down his spine when he saw the weapons and ammunition on the ship. With so much ammunition, an entire island could be blown up and sunk. Gong Jia asked, do you want to take a look at the warehouse? No need. Yu was not interested in those cold weapons. Gong Jia glanced at him and smiled. Yu, do you remember the first thing you did when you joined Hurricane Group? Huh? You proposed a price and sold that blueprint to Hurricane Group for 100 million. After that, you used that money to invest in a toy company that was on the verge of bankruptcy. Everyone said that you were crazy. Only a lunatic would spend 100 million to buy a blueprint from a child. Gong Jia smiled. He was the one who paid that 100 million. 100 million was just a small sum to him. He just wanted to see what a child would do with 100 million. Buy countless lollipops? Or piles of toys and snacks? It was hard to imagine that he would invest in a toy company. Chapter 3263. Back then, when you invested in Leji, you used Li Hanlin's name. In other words, this 100 million is equivalent to being under Li Hanlin's name. Aren't you worried that Li Hanlin will burn the bridge after using you and turn against you after Leji comes back from the dead? After all, this is not a small sum of money. Li Hanlin is a very capable person. However, I like him for two reasons. Firstly, it's because of his loyalty. Secondly, it's because I believe that if he turns his back on me, Leji will be a pile of ruins in his hands. Gong Jie seemed to be picking on him. Firstly, how can you be so sure that he's loyal to you and has no other intentions? Secondly, how can you be so sure that without you, Leji will be a pile of ruins? Yu replied patiently, firstly, I've interacted with him a few times and I believe in my own judgment of people. In fact, I'm not wrong about him. Secondly, Leji was originally a pile of ruins with a lack of cash flow. Maybe with this 100 million renminbi, it can recover, but it can't solve the root of the problem. Leji's business philosophy is problematic and their product development is not enough. To Leji, I'm much more important than that 100 million renminbi. Gong Jia was stunned for a long time. It was hard to imagine that a 6-year-old kid could have such courage. He suddenly squatted down in front of him and pulled his face. Yu felt pain from the pull and took a step back. He looked at him warily and said unhappily, "What are you doing? It hurts. I want to see what kind of person is hiding under your skin, huh?" Yu was puzzled. "What do you mean?" "Yu, to be honest, don't tell me you're a mutated species. Or, in the movies I've seen, people come back from the dead and travel back in time. Don't tell me you're from the future." Yu said coldly, "You're crazy." Gong Jia said, "Otherwise, it'll be hard to convince me that you're a 6-year-old kid." "Yu, monster?" Yu's eyes twitched. "If I'm a little monster, then you're a big monster." Gong Jia laughed. "When I was 6 years old, I was still playing with mud. You still don't know what a computer is." At that time, computers had not been popularized and the internet had not been developed. This is the first time in my life that I've seen someone say it out loud even though they know they're stupid. Gong Jia choked. Yu rubbed her rosy cheeks and said unhappily, "I'm also troubled by her high IQ." "How is having a high IQ a problem?" Yu glanced at him coldly from the corner of his eyes. "Sometimes, it takes a lot of effort to communicate with idiots like you." Gong Jia's face turned cold. "Isn't it annoying to be with a bunch of idiots?" Gong Jia felt even more depressed. "Are you looking down on Uncle?" Yu gave him a nonchalant look and snorted coldly. However, she did not say anything. The feeling of being looked down on by a little kid was really not good at all. "No. It hurt. Quick." Gong Jia was very hurt. Yu was not just looking down on him. It was very tiring to be with that idiot Xiao Yichen every day. Yu said, Geniuses are always lonely. I didn't expect that someone as handsome as me would say such sad words." Gong Jia said, "You're heartless. If it weren't for my 100 million, Leji wouldn't be where he is today. Even if you didn't give me that 100 million, someone else would." Gong Jia's expression turned even uglier. Chapter 3264. Gong Jia was about to go berserk. Since when did he keep talking about it? Gong Jia could not be bothered to argue with him. When it came to sharp tongues, Yu was definitely number one. He did not know how this guy's brain worked. Sometimes, a sentence that came out of his mouth could simply infuriate people to death. Gong Jia also admitted defeat. "Let's not talk about this anymore." Gong Jia laughed. "Do you need me to take you on a tour of the cargo ship?" Yu nodded happily. The cargo ship was very big. How big was it? It had a cargo capacity of 15,000 TEU. There were a few hundred warehouses in total. Among them, there were more than 10 warehouses with large reserves that were specially used to carry large parts and goods. For example, the parts of fighter jets, or some important heavy industry parts. Hurricane Group was involved in a wide range of products, from guns and ammunition to fighter jets. Their manufacturing technology was the best in the world. However, due to the special nature of fighter jets, they were usually used for cargo ships compared to planes and trains. Fighter jets were very big. When they were transported, they would often dismantle the plane into parts and transport them together. Just one wing of the plane would take up a large warehouse. Therefore, this cargo ship's large warehouse was used to transport fighter jet parts. Usually, it could transport 10 fighter jets. Yu looked down one after another and was quite surprised. When the warehouse door opened, he stood at the 8-meter-tall warehouse door and realized that this cargo ship was really big. Just the door alone was 8 meters high. It was too shocking. So the J-1-2 fighter jet is this big? What else could it be? Gong Jia leaned against the door with a deep smile. Some of the parts of this fighter jet were designed by you. He walked in front of him and said in a deep voice, "This fighter jet is worth $300 million US. Actual combat has proven that the J-1-2 is more suitable for the North African battlefield than the American Eagle. According to my calculations, the cost of this fighter jet is only about 10 million. Compared to the selling price of the Hurricane, it is definitely cheap. Military munitions are really profitable. The 300 million isn't for a fighter jet. It's for the North African battlefield. It's for the government's biggest bargaining chip to keep the armed forces in check. 300 million may be expensive, but they're very nimble with it. Moreover, they even reluctantly gave up the mining rights to the Hurricanes. How despicable." Gong Jia disagreed. "Despicable? How am I despicable? You think I don't know? North Africa is in political turmoil. The reason why the anti-Jianghu armed groups have the ability to contend against the Jianghu is because Hurricane sold them a batch of high-power munitions. A rocket directly blew up the parliament building. Otherwise, the government wouldn't be so anxious to buy this fighter jet. In that case, it seemed a little complicated. But it was actually very simple. The war in North Africa started when the Gong Jia sold a batch of firearms to the anti-Jianghu army. When the war started, the government was caught off guard, and the parliament building was directly bombed into ruins. Therefore, in order to keep the situation in check, the government had no choice but to import a large number of weapons from the Hurricane Group. The Hurricane Group was the world's largest profiteer group. All businessmen were profiteers. This saying wasn't without reason. Gong Xiaoying was a businessman. Naturally, he wouldn't do a business that was at a loss. Although the Hurricane Group didn't start the war, it escalated the war. Chapter 3265. In other words, the reason why the Hurricane Group was feared was because the Hurricane Group had the biggest say in the war. Gong Jia looked at Yu with deep eyes and smiled. "Yu, I'm more and more impressed with you." "Same to you." Gong Jia suddenly changed the topic. "However, when it comes to ambition, you're more ruthless than me. So far, your air control theory is the craziest plan I've ever seen. The original intention of my Sky-Eye plan is to maintain world peace." "Oh? How do you know that once the Sky-Eye plan is developed, world peace will really be achieved?" Gong Jia paused for a moment before continuing. "In this world, there's no limit to one's ambition. The history of war is as long as the history of mankind. The ambition of man is endless. In ancient times, wars were for power. Now, it's for resources. The reason why Africa and the Middle East are in constant war is because of rich mineral resources, oil, and natural gas. The ambition of man is indeed endless. Even if the earth is destroyed, the sky will still be there." Yu crossed his arms and smiled. The rivers will dry up and the land will dry up, but there will never be a day when the vast sky will be destroyed. Once you have control of the sky, you will truly control the world. Whoever gets control of the air control theory first will have the ability to dominate the world. When that time comes, world peace will no longer be a matter of who has the final say. Gong Jia looked at him. The child in front of him was adorable. His pink cheeks were like the finest jade. It was hard to imagine that such words came from the mouth of such a child. Fortunately, such a child was his nephew. Otherwise, it was hard to imagine how terrifying it would be if such a person became an enemy. The journey on the sea was longer than the flight. The cargo ship needed to stop at Vitoman port to deliver a batch of orders and then rush to the Hurricane Group headquarters. However, it was Yu Yu's first time on a cargo ship. Therefore, he was very curious about everything on the ship. Gong Jia would also tell him about some interesting things that happened on the sea when he was escorting the firearms. Once, when we passed by the Somali Straits, we met a bunch of reckless bandits who chased after us. They hijacked our cargo ship and forcibly boarded it. Yu Yu was stunned when she heard this. These islands are really bold. How dare they kidnap the Hurricane Group? The ship didn't fly a flag that day. Generally speaking, cargo ships would hang the logo of the Hurricane Group. No matter how arrogant an island was, they wouldn't dare to act recklessly. Unfortunately, on that day, the flag was blown away by the sea breeze. When the pirates saw such a large cargo ship, they had evil intentions. The Somali pirates were the most notorious in the sea. This was a group of criminals who specialized in robbing other countries' ships at sea. With the outbreak of the civil war in Somalia, pirate activities in the Gulf of Aden had become more frequent. There had been many cases of hijacking and even violent killings of sailors. Among them, the most notorious teams were the Puntland Guards and Merca. Yu Yu also knew a little about the evil deeds in Somalia. Somalia was one of the most underdeveloped countries in the world. Its industrial base was weak, and its economy was weak. Coupled with the effects of war, its economy had declined even more. Chapter 3266. Some time ago, there was news that a cargo ship passing through the Gulf of Aden was hijacked by Somali pirates. The cargo on the ship was robbed, the crew was shot dead, and the captain was kidnapped. The government came forward to negotiate, but the negotiation failed because of the reward. The captain was killed. This incident became the biggest crisis in the history of the country. The citizens complained about the government's incompetence in the negotiation. What happened after that? They regretted it after they boarded the ship. Yu Yu cursed in his heart. They must have died miserably. Those pitiful islanders boarded the cargo ship aggressively, only to be greeted by a few cannons facing them. Under Gong Jia's orders, they were blasted into ashes. The remaining islanders wanted to escape, but their small ships were sunk by Gong Jia's armed cargo ship. Sunk, just imagining the scene was enough to make one's heart tremble. They're really ruthless. Gong Jia said innocently, they wanted to die, so I couldn't do anything about it. The next day, the cargo ship arrived at Vitoman port. The transaction time was 11:00 at night, and the location was at Minghai port. There was still half an hour before the appointed time. Gong Jia wanted Yu Yu to stay, but Yu Yu said that he wanted to go with him to see the world. Gong Jia did not object. The person who traded with Hurricane was a Russian arms dealer. His name was Damon, a middle-aged man in his 50s. He used to be in the Soviet Air Force and used to serve in the peacekeeping force. After the dissolution of the Soviet Union, he started his business by privately selling armors. His background was not big, but it was not small either. He mainly focused on the East Asian arms market and had a large sales network in the East Asian arms industry. He could be considered a small tycoon. He had dealings with Hurricane for many years. He was also a regular customer of Hurricane in the past few decades. Their friendship was considered deep. Yu had heard about this man from Gong Jia on the boat. He was a cunning man with a greedy nature, which was a characteristic of businessmen. Other than that, he was not dangerous. In his eyes, military merchants were no different from ordinary merchants. They both did business and made money by selling goods. There was no difference. It was just that the goods sold by military merchants were more dangerous. Yu asked, "Uncle, what's the deal this time?" Gong Jia replied, "The goods included 300 grenades, 5,000 rifles, 10,000 pistols, and 100,000 rifle bullets. The transaction fee was 8 million renminbi." As he spoke, he took out a few documents and contracts from his briefcase. "Everything has been settled with Demon. We'll hand over the money and receive the goods." Yu nodded and didn't say anything else. He wanted to end the deal early so that he could go back to sleep. He was sleepy now. A line of black cars and 2 large trucks slowly drove into the port. When Demon arrived at the port with a group of men, he could see the extremely eye-catching huge cargo ship from afar through the window. He could see the group of people standing in front of the port at a glance. Late at night, it was cold. Now the port was shrouded in moonlight and looked particularly bleak. Chapter 3267. The man was of medium build. Although he was in his 50s, his facial features were very handsome. He had a black beard, and age had not left too many traces on his face. His every movement had the unique gentlemanly demeanor of a Russian and the valiant bearing of a Jun. Gong Jia put on a black hat and pushed open the car door. When he walked in front of him with Yu in his arms, a strange look flashed across Demon's face. He sized up the little munchkin in confusion and looked a little wary. However, out of courtesy, he still reached out his hand in a friendly manner. The two of them shook hands politely. "Mr. Demon, the goods are ready. You can check them at any time." Demon nodded and his expression softened. However, a sly look flashed across his eyes and disappeared in a flash. "Are all the goods I want on the ship?" "Of course." Demon nodded and said, "The contract and transaction fee are ready. But before that, can you allow me to check my goods first?" Gong Jia smiled and said, "Of course." Demon smiled and turned his head. He signaled with his eyes and 2 of his subordinates went up to the warehouse to check the goods. Gong Jia also ordered his subordinates to bring the samples of the goods for this transaction. He opened the boxes neatly and picked up an FNFNC submachine gun. He walked in front of Demon and explained in fluent Russian with a smile, "It's my honor to be able to show you the equipment for this transaction." The FN rifle was modified from the FNCAL design. It uses a 30-round M16 standard magazine. It can be semi-automatic, 3-point, or fully automatic. The bolt mechanism is similar to the design of an AK-47. It's very accurate and has high lethality. Yu was a little surprised. He didn't expect him to know Russian. Russian was extremely difficult, second only to Arabic. What he didn't know was that among the 5 languages that Gong Jia knew, Arabic and Russian were the most proficient. Demon calmly took the rifle with both hands. This fellow was really heavy. He held the rifle with one hand and gently stroked the body of the rifle with the other. The texture of the metal and the workmanship could be considered fine. At the very least, it could be distinguished from inferior products at a glance. Such a rifle was priced at 1,500 per rifle in the black market, and Hurricane was priced at 1,000 per rifle. It was a very generous price. The weapons made by Hurricane were excellent in all aspects. Daimon was very satisfied. He put down the rifle and studied the Desert Eagle at the side. He picked it up and weighed it in his hand. Then, he aimed the gun at the ground and pulled the trigger. Bang! It was extremely powerful. After a while, a few of his subordinates returned and nodded to him, indicating that the goods were complete. Demon lowered his head and casually played with the pistol as he ordered in a low voice, "Sridov, sign and accept the goods." His subordinate nodded, took out 2 contracts from his briefcase, and signed them with Gong Jia. Gong Jia sent someone to open the 2 small suitcases, which were full of US dollars. He went forward to check, but found that there were only 6 million US dollars. Young Master Gong, the transaction amount is wrong. What? Wrong? Gong Jia turned around with a puzzled expression. His subordinate hurriedly went forward and checked again. He raised his head and said in a deep voice, "Mr. Demon, are you sure there are 8 million US dollars in here?" Demon narrowed his eyes and looked at her deeply. There was a hint of dissatisfaction in his tone. According to the market price, 6 million is already very high. Chapter 3268. Demon smiled and said, "The cost of this batch of firearms is less than 1 million, and the transaction amount is 2 million. I'm already very sincere." After thinking for a while, Gong Jia said coldly, "Jason, check the contract." Jason nodded and was about to check the contents of the contract when Demon smiled and said, "The specific transaction amount is not written in the contract." So, it was a last-minute adjustment? Gong Jia calmly raised his head. His eyes suddenly darkened, but he maintained his smile and asked, "So, Mr. Damon, are you trying to play word games with me?" Demon quickly waved his hand. "Oh. I didn't mean that." "Then what do you mean?" Demon smiled and said, "I'm considered a regular customer of the Hurricane Group. By the way, I'll tell you something. In fact, there are many firearms dealers in our country, and the weapons and ammunition they sell are known for their low prices. However, I've been sincere in my transaction with you since the beginning because of my many years of friendship with the Hurricane Group. This transaction fee is already very generous. Mr. Demon, as a businessman, isn't the most important principle of sincerity? Do you want to violate it? It's like this. There was a problem with the last batch of firearms during the transportation process, and I lost 2 million for nothing. Because of this, the transaction fee this time is lowered by 2 million. Gong Jia did not buy it, though. He was already convinced that this old fart was bent on getting more money out of him. His expression did not change as he fiddled with the Desert Eagle in his hand. He pulled the trigger and then said indifferently, "There is a saying in China that you get what you pay for. I wonder which war pit did you get your cheap firearms from?" 8 million, not a cent less. This demon was indeed cunning. He dared to play dirty with him. Did he want to die? Demon smiled. His eyes curved, and the wrinkles at the corners of his eyes frowned. On the surface, it looked like a gentle smile, but in the depths of his eyes, there was a cunning and sinister look unique to merchants. 6 million. Not a cent more. Gong Jia's lips curled into a mocking smile as he suddenly raised the gun in his hand and aimed it accurately at the center of his brows. His cold phoenix eyes condensed a dangerous cold light as the corners of his lips curled up into a smile that was not a smile. "You are courting death." Damon was shocked and took a few steps back in a panic. The bodyguards behind him immediately took out their guns and pointed them at Gong Jia. At the same time, they covered Damon behind them. Gong Jia arrogantly raised his chin and glanced at them coldly from the corner of his eyes. He sneered disdainfully. At the same time, Jason stood in front of Demon to protect him. The other subordinates were fully armed, and their guns were aimed at Demon in unison. Both sides were ready to fight. The atmosphere was as tense as a bowstring. It was so tense that it could explode at any moment. Even the air suddenly became suffocating. Demon stood behind the 2 tall bodyguards and asked in fear, "What do you want?" Gong Jia curled his lips playfully and said lightly, "I have a bad temper. How dare you bargain with me? You are courting death." Demon still had a lingering fear. Gong Jia's gaze was as sharp as a sword, and it felt like it could pierce through his heart. Even though he had seen a lot, he was still frightened by this gaze. Chapter 3269. He had only brought 2 bodyguards with him this time. If they fought, they would be killed instantly. Damon adjusted his clothes and gestured for the two men in front of him to put down their guns. Damon then smiled and said, "We are loyal friends. Don't hurt our friendship because of 2 million. Gong Jia said, 8 million, not a cent less. Sign it." From a certain perspective, his words were more like a domineering order. Damon nodded, sighed helplessly, and signed the contract obediently. He turned around and called for his men. After a while, his men handed him another suitcase. Inside it was $2 million. All that was left was to instruct the cargo workers to move the goods. Gong Jia leaned against the car door expressionlessly and lit a cigarette. Yu looked at the containers being moved from the cargo ship and lowered his eyes slightly. 300 grenades, 5,000 rifles, and 100,000 bullets. How many lives did this mean? Just as the group of people were busy, Damon's phone suddenly rang. He picked up the phone impatiently. Before he could speak, he heard his men anxiously shouting, "Boss! Something bad has happened." Damon was alert and asked seriously, "What happened?" The person who called was one of his 4 guardians. Before the deal, Damon had arranged for him to keep an eye on the road 1,000 meters away from the port so that he could respond to other situations. Just now, there were Interpol officers from New York heading towards the port. Damon suddenly choked on a mouthful of smoke and coughed for a while. His eyes widened in disbelief. What? Interpol? Yes. Interpol, and one of them is the highest inspector of the International Anti-Terrorism Alliance. How many people? A total of 5 people, including the driver. Damon was so angry that his eyes turned red. He cursed and scolded angrily, "Why didn't you inform me earlier? Don't you think it's too late to call now? They passed by just now, so I'm being interrogated." The subordinate was also quite helpless. These Americans from New York were really difficult to deal with. He had to persuade them in every possible way to smooth things over. As soon as the group of policemen drove away, he hurriedly tipped them off. "In other words, they are rushing to the port?" The man replied nervously, "Yes. I heard from one of the officers that they were chasing a suspicious cargo ship that was smuggling illegally." Damon hung up in a daze. Gong Jia heard the entire conversation between the two of them. His eyes were cold and gloomy. He glanced at Daimon, who was standing not far away with a calm expression. His face instantly darkened. "Interpol?" Damon nodded his head in a panic. If it was just a local police station, then there was really no need to worry, but if it alarmed Interpol, then the consequences would be much more serious. Illegally smuggling firearms across borders was a very serious crime. If the crime was light, the offender would be sentenced to more than 10 years in prison. If the crime was serious, the offender would be directly fed bullets. Illegally smuggling tens of thousands of bullets and more than 100 guns was considered a big deal. Then, looking at the batch of firearms he traded, the bullets he took were enough to boil a pot of porridge. He could die dozens of times over. They're after your freighter. Chapter 3270. They had actually lured the Interpol over. 1 kilometer. With the American speed, they could make a round trip in 5 minutes. They probably wouldn't even be able to escape now, right? What could they do in 5 minutes? Retreat? What about the munitions? They were only halfway through the shipment. The cargo ship wouldn't be able to travel far in 10 minutes, let alone 5 minutes. Furthermore, he definitely wouldn't be able to outrun the Interpol's car with the containers. Should he just sit and wait? Damon turned around and ordered loudly, "Luca, Jason, stop moving the cargo. Everyone evacuate the port in 5 minutes at full speed." The group of people turned around in surprise. Gong Jia's subordinates also walked over strangely and asked in confusion, "What happened? Look at what you've done. Who have you lured here along the way? The Interpol chased you all the way and you didn't notice?" As Damon spoke, he raised his wrist to look at the time and said angrily, D***M. It's too late. Gong Jia and Yu looked at each other. Little Munchkin asked in confusion, "Uncle, did something happen?" Gong Jia said coldly, "The Interpol from New York is about to arrive at the port." Everyone was shocked and stood rooted to the ground. Yu was still relatively calm. "If we leave, what about the cargo?" The Hurricane Group was powerful, but Gong Jia was also a frequent guest on the FBI and Interpol's wanted list. Even if Gong Jia was brought back to the headquarters by the Interpol for tea, he was confident that he could escape. However, this trip wasted a lot of time. If he was handed over to the Nuremberg military court, it would be troublesome. Gong Jia's subordinates were also surprised. How would they know that the cargo ship had been targeted by the Interpol since it left Elizabeth Port? Demon asked anxiously, "Mr. Gong, what should we do?" "Why would the Interpol?" "Shut up!" Gong Jia shouted coldly. He rubbed his chin thoughtfully and raised his eyebrows, trying to find a way out. It was too late to evacuate now. There was only one road from the port to the road, and the cargo ship couldn't leave the port for a while. He suddenly thought of something. He snatched the satellite phone from his subordinate and dialed a number. The call was quickly connected, and Gong Jia said in a deep voice, "Maman, I have some trouble here." He walked to the side and seemed to be negotiating with the person on the phone. At this moment, a silver car was speeding towards them. In the darkness of the night, the bright white searchlights were extremely dazzling. Demon frowned and narrowed his eyes. Without turning his head, he said, "Sridov, open the trunk and get the weapon." His subordinates looked at each other in confusion. Seeing that they were not moving, Demon scolded angrily, "What are you waiting for?" "Boss, what are you planning to do?" "What are you doing?" "Humph." As Demon spoke, he pulled out the pistol at his waist and swiftly loaded it. He turned around and said expressionlessly, "Of course we're going to kill our way out. Don't tell me I'm just going to sit here and wait to be brought back to the police headquarters for tea?" Chapter 3271. Needless to say, this method was both crude and simple. Seeing that Yu was still standing there in a daze, Demon pushed him impatiently. "Don't get in the way. Go back to the ship." Yu frowned and said coldly, "Don't touch me." The silver car stopped steadily, and a few tall European men got out of the car and walked towards the direction where they were gathered. Demon turned around and tried to calm down. He took out his phone and made a call. "Arrange a sentry immediately and watch that road. Don't let anyone pass. Also, check if there are any cameras in this port for me. Cut off the signal source. F***CK." Sridov pulled his sleeve in a daze. Boss, Demon was not in the mood to pay attention to him. He continued to order through the phone. "Watch the cars coming and going too. If there are any suspicious people, get rid of them immediately, boss, it's her." Demon had no choice but to turn his head and glare at them. He said angrily, "What are you doing?" Sridov pointed to the front. Demon looked in the direction he was pointing at and narrowed his eyes. Just as he was wondering why they were making such a fuss, his eyes widened and his expression changed drastically when he saw the silver-haired woman. The mobile phone in his hand suddenly fell to the ground. "Oh my God, it's her?" The unforeseen event came so suddenly that she didn't know what kind of expression she should use to face it. Demon was stunned and his expression did not change for a long time. A few of his men stood behind him expressionlessly. They looked at the large batch of goods behind them with gloomy faces. The situation now was really a bit of a dilemma. Gong Jia hung up the phone and walked over. When he saw the silver-haired girl walking towards them, he was stunned and a little shocked. "It's her?" Snow Fox, Interpol's anti-terrorism inspector. The first in charge of international anti-terrorism matters. Her code name was Snow Fox. Sridov was the first to react. He looked at the group of uniformed Americans in the distance and asked Demon nervously, "What should we do?" "Boss, do we still go?" Go your ass." Demon slapped the back of his head and asked angrily, "Can you beat him?" The highest inspector, Snow Fox, was a woman who was famous for her toughness. She and White Sparrow came from the training camp. It was said that she could easily defeat 3 well-trained mercenaries with her bare hands. Her marksmanship was even more terrifying than her skills. Whenever she pulled the trigger, there was never a life that she couldn't take. Yu followed everyone's gaze. Among the group of people, a slender woman was walking at the front. She had short silver hair that hung neatly to her ears. She had a face of mixed Eastern and European descent that was as exquisite as a painting. Especially her eyes. Under the moonlight, her purple pupils revealed a somewhat suffocating strangeness. Purple eyes, impressive. That was because there were not many people with purple irises in this world. Most people with purple irises were of mixed Eurasian descent. The woman was very tall. She was 1.75 meters tall, and her legs were straight and slender. Chapter 3272. However, the lines of her skin were not too conspicuous. Instead, it made her face that was as enchanting as a fairy's and added a bit of heroism to it. The group stood in place, waiting solemnly as they watched the Interpol walking over. Gong Jia watched helplessly as the woman walked up to him in a suave manner. He looked down at her from the corner of his eyes. She looked up and glanced at him coldly before brushing past him. When she brushed past him, she suddenly stopped in her tracks. Intentionally or unintentionally, she approached him and said meaningfully, "Gong Jia, you're in my hands again." Snow Fox sized him up and said word by word, "I've been chasing you for 3 months." Gong Jia let out a low chuckle, which, in her eyes, was full of mockery. He said coldly, "What can you do to me?" Snow Fox said coldly, "Let's wait and see." A few Americans stood in front of the containers. They looked at each other and started gesturing. As they were too far away, they could not hear anything clearly. All they could hear was the grumbling in a foreign language. It was really annoying. At that moment, Damon, who was standing at the side, was a little confused. He did not know that the Interpol had caught up with him. He was not prepared and could only stare at them helplessly. When he saw the leading Interpol, he laughed dryly. A golden-haired man beside the Snow Fox whistled excitedly at Demon who was standing at the hatch. He raised his eyebrows and seemed to be in a good mood. He said in high spirits, "Demon, it's you again, old man. You've been caught by us this time. How long has it been since we last saw each other? Do you still remember me?" How could he not remember? Panic flashed across Damon's face. "Jack, why is it you? Why can't it be me? In order to hunt you down, it was really difficult." The firearms dealers in this area were very familiar with these criminal police officers. After all, one was a cat and the other was a mouse. How could those who were in this line of work not have any dealings with them? He was even caught by this Interpol a few days ago. However, he did not have any evidence and Damon was cunning, so he escaped from his hands a few times. Look at the goods, there's quite a lot. It's enough for you to spend half your life in prison. Now, the evidence was irrefutable. Don't even think about escaping. Jack rubbed his fists in excitement. Demon had also been through a lot. He immediately calmed down. "Sir, I'm just an ordinary businessman. Why do you always have to make things difficult for me?" Jack narrowed his eyes dangerously and sized him up with a sinister look. He sneered coldly, "Ha! Ha! What kind of joke is this? An ordinary businessman? Would an ordinary businessman sell something like this?" As he spoke, he suddenly turned around and his sharp gaze turned towards the expressionless Gong Jia who was standing at the side. He coldly enunciated each word, "Today, none of you scum can escape." Gong Jia's expression froze. Then, he turned livid and subconsciously grabbed the gun at his waist. Jack turned around and waved his hand. He ordered, "Search." Snow Fox boarded the cargo ship. She crossed her arms and leaned against the cabin railing. She leisurely looked at every scene on the cargo ship. Her subordinates immediately began searching the cargo ship without any hindrance. Chapter 3273. One had to know that not even half of this batch of firearms had been transported away, and a large batch of goods was still on the cargo ship. Why would they still need to search? As long as they leisurely strolled around, they would be able to find the evidence in no time. This time, they were really at a dead end. This Snow Fox was really like a lingering spirit that refused to disperse. At the headquarters in New York, this woman seemed to be especially concerned about the firearms dealer. She had once spent half a month's time and energy to chase him all the way from America to Russia. She had persevered on the sea and chased him for more than half a month. In order to get rid of her, Demon had circled around the sea for more than 10 days and nights, but in the end, he still couldn't get rid of her. In the end, when he saw that she was about to catch up with him with her men, he had no choice but to throw a large number of munitions into the sea with tears and blood. Only then did he manage to escape from her pursuit with great difficulty. Thinking of that time. Demon's liver still trembled violently when he thought of it, and his heart was bleeding. Damn it! A few tons of goods, a batch of military munitions worth hundreds of millions, all thrown into the sea to feed the sharks just to avoid this little fox. When he went to the appointment, he was almost shot to death by his employer in a fit of anger. Thinking back to that time, Daimon had gritted his teeth and hated the Snow Fox to the core. Now that he saw her, he wished he could put a sack over her head and throw her into the sea to feed the sharks. This was what it meant when enemies met, their eyes blazed with hatred. It had to be said that this Snow Fox's perseverance towards criminals was really extraordinary. His face immediately turned pale, and he looked at the Snow Fox in fear. He saw that she was standing at the same spot without saying a word, with her hands crossed in front of her chest. She looked calm and composed, and her pair of sharp eyes were staring at Gong Jia. But that gaze, no matter how one looked at it, was fierce, like a knife cutting through one's bones. Jack leisurely looked around and suddenly saw Gong Jia standing at the side with a frown from the corner of his eye. He walked up to him with interest, smiled, lowered his head to size him up, raised his eyebrows, and said coldly, "Gong Jia, you also have a day like this. You know, in order to hunt you down, we have been following you on the sea for many days and nights. This time, we've finally caught you. Come back to the headquarters with us for tea." Gong Jia raised her head abruptly and stared at him for a long while. The corners of her lips curled up and she replied slowly in perfect English, "Sir, what crime have I committed for you to arrest me? You think you can smuggle military firearms? Oh. Then you'll have to show evidence." Jack's smile froze at the corner of his mouth. He stared at Gong Jia for a long time, then suddenly gritted his teeth and said, "You really won't shed a tear until you see the coffin. You too. You won't give up until you see the end." Jack was about to say something when his subordinates suddenly reported that most of the warehouses could not be opened. Hearing that, the Snow Fox immediately said to Gong Jia, "Tell your subordinates to open all the warehouses." Gong Jia casually turned around and sized her up. He asked elegantly in return, "Do you have a search warrant?" The Snow Fox was speechless for a moment. "No." Gong Jia suddenly chuckled. "No, and you dare to search my ship?" Gong Jia retorted, "Who gave you the authority?" Chapter 3274. Snow Fox's expression was also slightly distorted. Jack immediately stopped smiling and said in a low voice, "I suspect that you have something to do with this huge cross-border smuggling of firearms, so," Gong Jia coldly interrupted him, "don't be suspicious, the entire cargo ship is filled with toys." Toys? Jack was so angry that he laughed. Toys? You're lying through your teeth. Snow Fox's face immediately turned pale. Gong Jia. You don't have to struggle anymore. Open the warehouse. Without a search warrant, I have the right to refuse. Snow Fox clenched his fists, his expression cold. Just then, a few young police officers walked over, looked at each other, and reported the situation. Actually, it was not much. Just as Snow Fox expected, before the 3 police officers got close to the warehouse, they saw dozens of ammunition scattered on the deck. Then, they followed the road and saw a warehouse with an open door, which was filled with firearms and ammunition. Just the warehouse that had not been emptied was enough to convict Gong Jia of the crime, not to mention the 3 warehouses next to it. Even without a search warrant, there was no way to open the other warehouses. Just the evidence alone was enough to convict him and arrest him. A few police officers turned around and dragged a large box of goods to him. Jack looked at the huge amount of criminal evidence with satisfaction before turning to look at Gong Jia smugly and laughing. Gong Jia, you're the best man in the world. This is a great gift. I can't wait to go back to the headquarters and treat you to a drink. All these years, in order to catch Gong Jia, the people of Interpol came one after another, but none of them were able to invite Gong Jia back to the headquarters for a drink. Gong Jia's value on the wanted list was close to 1 billion USD. Unlike Snow Fox, Jack's purpose of catching Gong Jia was for this amazing reward. If he could bring him to justice, he would not have to worry about food and clothing for the rest of his life. Gong Jia stood by the side expressionlessly, with a scornful smile on his lips. Yu looked at Gong Jia's expression and knew that he was confident that he could escape unscathed. Jack turned around and faced the man with his arms outstretched. He let out a hearty laugh and asked in a refreshed manner, "Aren't these enough to be considered evidence?" The corners of Gong Jia's lips curled up as he lazily got up and slowly walked over to her. The other police officers were very excited. It was not only because of this batch of firearms or the joy of successfully hunting down an international criminal, but also because they were finally about to capture Gong Jia, the legendary crown prince of Hurricane Group, who was on the wanted list. This meant that they had made a great contribution. This is Gong Jia we're talking about. This young man was one of the top 3 most wanted men on the wanted list. He was a military businessman who had occupied the top 3 positions for several years. This kind of result made them all overjoyed. So many years of hard work had not gone to waste. The faces of these righteous police officers flashed with the glow of victory. Gong Jia's eyes revealed a mysterious look. He walked to Jack's side, lowered his head, and glanced at the box of firearms and ammunition. Chapter 3275. Gong Jia smiled and casually picked up a Desert Eagle from the box. He weighed it in his hand and played with it a few times. With a smile on his face, he cast a sidelong glance at a certain person who had been silent all this while. He then turned his face away and said nonchalantly, "These are just toys. Are you sure you want to arrest me for a batch of legal toys?" When he said that casually, everyone in the cabin went dead silent. Other than Yu, everyone else froze and their faces were expressionless. Now, it was Jack's turn to turn green. Toys? These real guns were described by him as lifelike toys? What kind of international joke was this? Everyone was petrified. Snow Fox sneered, "Gong Jia, these are not toys. You don't have to waste everyone's time." Her subordinate respectfully wiped the pistol for her and handed it to her. His eyes were very sincere as he said, "Officer. These are definitely not toys. These are definitely real guns and live bullets. Sir, please give the order to arrest him immediately." Gong Jia smiled sinisterly as he turned around and played with the pistol. His movements were elegant but casual. He said faintly, "If I say they are toys, then they are toys. Why don't I try it on you?" The black muzzle was pointed at Snow Fox's forehead. Everyone suddenly became nervous and raised their pistols to aim at Gong Jia. It was as if they would shoot him the next second if he pulled the trigger. Gong Jia smiled and pulled the trigger. However, there was a bang and no bullets were fired. There was only a red laser that accurately shot in between her eyebrows. Snow Fox was stunned and was surprised. This gun, it was not real? Gong Jia put away his pistol. Jack, who was standing at the side, was stunned. He walked to the box and picked up a Desert Eagle. He aimed at the deck and pulled the trigger. However, there was a bang and the laser light flashed for a while. It was really an imitation gun? Jack was shocked. These were toys and did not have any lethality. No wonder he dared to open the door and let them search without fear. The Snow Fox thought of something again and walked to Damon's truck. She opened the door and searched for a few toys inside. She looked at them carefully. Although they looked very similar, they were not real guns. She had been set up. Could it be that he already knew that they had been following him all this time, so the toy guns in front of them were just a smokescreen? Damon was even more shocked. Could it be that this kid already knew that the Interpol would track him down? That was why he used a toy gun for the transaction. It was a deliberate trick. Snow Fox's expression became complicated. She threw the gun back into the box and walked back to Gong Jia. She grabbed him by the collar and pulled him in front of her. She glared at him and said through gritted teeth, "Are you kidding me?" Gong Jia smiled. "How would I dare?" Snow Fox ordered coldly, "Open the other warehouses." "Sir, unless there is an arrest warrant, I have the right to reject your unreasonable request." Gong Jia interrupted her without any hesitation. The smile on his lips was unclear. "Otherwise, sir, you are violating human rights. You want an arrest warrant?" Chapter 3276. The call was quickly connected. Snow Fox said, "Boss, I've tracked them all the way and intercepted the Hurricane Group's cargo ship at Vitoman Harbor. However, the cargo room is locked. Please issue a search warrant. Snow Fox, withdraw the team." Snow Fox was stunned. "What? Withdraw the team? Quickly evacuate your men from the harbor." Snow Fox held the satellite phone and turned around with a cold expression. However, she saw Gong Jia leaning on the side with his arms crossed. His calm expression did not change at all. She turned around with her back facing Gong Jia. She lowered her voice and said, "Boss, we've been chasing the Hurricane Group's cargo ship day and night. I'm sure that the cargo ship is carrying a large amount of firearms. Why don't you issue a search warrant? I've already issued the order to withdraw the team. If you disobey, you'll face special punishment." Snow Fox was shocked. A cold glint flashed across her eyes. She put down the satellite phone and turned around. Jack went up and asked curiously, "Boss, when did you issue a search warrant?" "Jack." Snow Fox bit her lips and said in a low voice, "Withdraw the team." "Withdraw the team." Jack took a while to react. He frowned and looked at Gong Jia, who was playing with the pistol expressionlessly. He leaned closer and asked in a low voice, "Snow Fox, what do you mean by this? What did boss say? Withdraw the team? Why do we have to withdraw? Boss said to withdraw the team." Snow Fox suppressed her anger and said, "Jack, withdraw the team immediately and return to the headquarters." Jack's heart turned cold. He was furious. He lowered his voice and said, "Boss is obviously protecting the criminal. This is shielding. I won't allow him to do this. This is boss's order. Without a search warrant, we have no right to arrest him." Jack glanced at Gong Jia in surprise. He made a guess in his heart. "Don't you feel indignant about withdrawing the team just like that?" Snow Fox said coldly, "There's nothing I can do even if I feel indignant. Jack, this is an order from the higher-ups." You stood beside Gong Jia. She looked at Snow Fox and Jack, who were swallowing their anger. She smiled faintly and said, "Uncle, what methods did you use?" Gong Jia said, "Even if it's Interpol, they wouldn't dare to mess with the Hurricane Group. After all, if anything happens to me, my father won't let it go." Destroying their headquarters is a small matter, but if it affects my family, the losses will outweigh the gains. If you're aware of this, why did this woman naively follow you for a day and night? You boss, Gong Jia said, because she was too naive and had too many illusions about justice. She looks like she hates you. Yu asked half-jokingly, Uncle, you didn't bully her, did you? Her code name is Snow Fox, and she is the new anti-terrorism inspector of Interpol. Gong Jia said, when I started handling the affairs of the group, she was still one of the police officers. She's a war orphan. Not long after she was born, her parents died in the war. Therefore, she hates the arms dealers. In order to capture me, her team exchanged fire with my mercenary group. She was the only one who survived out of the dozens of people in the team. So tragic. Yu's lips twitched. No wonder she hates you so much. When she looks at you, she grits her teeth and wants to tear you into pieces. Chapter 3277. There are so many people who hate me to the core. If she wants to tear me into pieces, she must have the ability to do so. The Snow Fox walked in front of him and stared at him with a piercing gaze. It was as if an ice blade was cutting him into pieces. She clenched her fists tightly. Just by looking at him, she was reminded of her mercenary group that had lost their lives under the guns of his mercenary group. 54 members, all of them had lost their lives. She was the only one left alive because she was the only woman in the group. She did not know if it was pity or something else. She had survived, but she felt ashamed of her own incompetence. All this while, she had tried her best to capture him. She had racked her brains, but every time, she could only watch helplessly as he escaped unscathed. She was indignant. She was indignant. She did not know when the day would come when she would be able to avenge the 54 members of the Alpha Squad. She said, Gong Jia, don't be too smug. Sooner or later, I will kill you myself and avenge the Alpha Squad. When Gong Jia heard that, he smirked and lowered his head contemptuously. He leaned closer to her and said provocatively, then I shall wait and see. Snow Fox was completely enraged. She used all her strength to control herself. She turned around and waved her hand fiercely. Retreat. Following her order, the team that she led followed in unison. Jack was so angry that he was about to go crazy. Even so, there was nothing he could do. He could only watch as Gong Jia stood in front of him, but he was powerless to arrest him. The feeling of defeat was indescribable. Hurricane Group, let's wait and see. He gave him the middle finger and turned to leave unwillingly. Yu raised her eyebrows and looked at the scattered guns on the ground. She asked doubtfully, are these really toys? There are only some subtle differences between imitation guns and real guns. You can say that they are real guns, but no one can refute that they are toys. However, the real guns in the warehouse cannot be exposed. Otherwise, I have no right to resist her arrest warrant. Does she dare to arrest you? Why not? Gong Jia smiled. She wants to arrest me even in her dreams. I thought the Hurricane Group was lawless and no one dared to arrest them. Gong Jia laughed it off. Really? In your eyes, is this what a hurricane looks like? Isn't that so? Not exactly. Gong Jia continued, in this world, there are many laws that check and balance each other. There is no such thing as a monopoly. There are many people who want to suppress the Hurricane Group, poison Lord Jiangshan. After all, we have infringed on the interests of many groups. Although they can't tolerate us, they rely on us. Not being able to tolerate hurricanes, yet relying on hurricanes sounded very contradictory. However, this was the law of the world. There was no absolute dominance. There were only checks and balances. The Hurricane Group could be said to be the biggest company in the military industry. They had dozens of military factories. Even in super empires like Country M and Country E, their military factories were only half of the Hurricane Group's. Chapter 3278. However, even if they relied on each other, Hurricane Group took a large share of the profits on many battlefields, which inevitably violated the interests of other countries. One must know that Hurricane Group had intercepted the arms deals of superpowers like America more than once. Every deal was worth billions of dollars. Accumulated, it was enough to buy an entire country. Therefore, Hurricane Group was blacklisted by many countries. In the past, many countries joined forces to restrict Hurricane Group and signed the Missile Non-Proliferation Treaty. The treaty stipulated that many weapons could not be sold. Moreover, they agreed to ban Hurricane Group and refused to trade with Hurricane Group. Munitions was a lucrative business, and it was not rare to get more than 5 times the profits. But the market was also very limited. Many developed countries had their own military factories, and their military teams had limited purchases. But in poor countries, those who did not have money could not afford to buy and could not afford to do so. Most of the war-torn countries were poor. Therefore, the main market was concentrated in developing countries. For example, Lockheed Martin Group, which was ranked second only to Hurricane Group, was backed by America's government. Its best-selling products were the F-22 and Boeing 747. Its products were mainly sold in China, but America's military was a global force. The real boss behind such a group was America's government. In such a lucrative industry, most countries would not allow private groups to take a share of the profits. Moreover, if private groups controlled the manufacturing of weapons, wouldn't it be the biggest threat to the government? In the beginning, Hurricane Group's first bucket of gold was made in Africa. Gong Xiaoying took a batch of orders from Africa. However, Africa was poor and could not afford the high cost of weapons. However, Africa's mineral and oil reserves were extremely rich. As a condition, the president exchanged 10 years of oil exploration rights for a long-term deal with Hurricane Group. The profits from oil were definitely considerable. In addition, Gong's family was originally a shipping empire. Therefore, with this order, Gong's family earned 10 times the total value of the order. Next, he placed his backbone in the Middle East and opened up the market step by step. He vigorously developed more advanced weapons until he became an unshakable overlord and finally gained a foothold in this highly competitive market. Furthermore, Gong Xiaoying was a shrewd businessman. He knew that the market was limited, so he used quantity to win. Lockheed Martin sold the same grenade for $5 and he sold it for $3. Even though it was only $2, buying them in bulk was not a small expense. Small profits but quick turnover attracted countless countries to fill their inventories. In order to compete with the Hurricane Group, Lockheed Martin also lowered the price. In the end, they found that the same price of $3, the Hurricane Group still sold better. Many of the weapons produced by Lockheed Martin were not only complex but also limited in power. However, the weapons produced by the Hurricane Group were easy to use and had advantages in terms of control. Whether it was in terms of range, fire control, or man-machine efficiency, they had a huge advantage. In terms of power, the weapons produced by Lockheed Martin were relatively backward. Therefore, even if the price was the same, they did not have much of an advantage in most countries. Chapter 3279. Hurricane Group's strong financial resources did not mainly rely on military munitions. Gong Xiaoying also had investments in other fields. He held the oil exploration rights of many countries in the Middle and East. He also had a few private mines in Africa. Investing these profits in other fields would help Hurricane Group grow. Therefore, Gong Jia was the one who was truly in charge of military munitions. He was the chief commander of Hurricane Group. At first, he was mainly in charge of North America. Now, Gong Xiaoying also put Africa under his name. Therefore, Gong Jia's position in Hurricane Group was equivalent to the second-in-command of the Gong family. He had great power. On the surface, the Gong family was very harmonious. However, under the calm surface, there were many hidden schemes. However, to Gong Jia, these little tricks were nothing to him. Uncle. Yes. Did you already know that someone was following us along the way? I noticed it when we passed by Liujia in Nanwan. Gong Jia said, don't think that this is just a cargo ship. The radar and munitions on it are the most advanced in the world. It's simply wishful thinking for you to intercept my goods without alerting me with your meager equipment. After ICPO left, Gong Jia sent someone to hand over the real goods to Damon. He carried Yu and boarded the ship. Then, they sailed toward the headquarters of Hurricane Group. By the time Yu woke up after a night, the sky outside the window was already turning bright, and the first glimmer of dawn had arrived. He was shocked. He remembered that when he fell asleep, it was already early in the morning. Why did he wake up in the early morning too? Could it be that he had slept for a day and a night? Yu sat up and glanced at his phone. Then, he suddenly realized what had happened. Just like taking a plane overseas, when the ship was crossing the ocean, it would also cross time zones and there would be a time difference. Every once in a while, the crew would adjust the ship's clock. Every 15 degrees of longitude, it would be slowed down by an hour. In this way, he had slept for exactly 8 hours. Yu stretched his back, changed his clothes, and left the room. He walked to the cabin. In the dining room, bread and milk were prepared. Yu finished his breakfast and walked to the deck. Gong Jia leaned against the railing and looked into the distance. Yu walked over and saw him holding a pair of binoculars. He asked curiously, "Uncle, what are you looking at?" Gong Jia carried him and handed him the binoculars. "Take a look." Yu took the binoculars and looked at the lens. At the end of his vision, an island was slowly approaching. What was shocking was that there was a majestic castle on the island. It was heavily guarded and had a domineering aura. The reason why it was said to be domineering was because the top of the castle was constantly emitting several red rays. In the next second, several helicopters slowly rose up and flew towards another island. That is the Gong family's castle. The castle, although Yu had heard that Gong Xiaoying lived in the castle, when he saw it with his own eyes, the shock in his heart was indescribable. The castle was in the typical style of the Middle Ages. This Karl Castle was a castle built during the Renaissance period. The castle was cylindrical with a conical roof. In the castle, there were 109 luxuriously decorated rooms, a mysterious tower, a hidden passage that was 390 meters long, an elegant greenhouse garden, and a charm garden that was 10 acres in size. Chapter 3280. Gong Xiaoying had spent a huge sum of money to buy this castle and moved it to this island together with the foundation. Moved it with the foundation? The cost of moving the castle is the same as the cost of buying it. After all, it's across 2 oceans. That's too scary, Yu spat, what an abominable capitalist. This is nothing. Gong Jia smiled and said meaningfully, the wealth that the Gong family has is definitely beyond your imagination. Yu's lips twitched. How rich? Gong Jia said, wealth that is hard to realize. Yu was speechless. Hard to realize, that was too scary. It was hard to imagine how tragic the consequences would be if Daddy became enemies with the Gong family. He couldn't help but worry. What if Gong Xiaoying, who was his grandfather, couldn't accept Daddy's words no matter what? He understood Gong Xiaoying's character. He was very stubborn. Although he was in a high position and couldn't forget his grandmother, he was so high-spirited when he was young. Such a man would be stubborn no matter what he did. If he insisted on not accepting Daddy, he couldn't persuade him. But, he was more worried that Gong Xiaoying would use other means to deal with Daddy. Gong Jia looked at him thoughtfully. He knew what he was worried about. His large palm patted Yu's shoulder gently. Gong Jia squatted down and held his shoulder. He asked, if there really comes a day when your grandfather and Daddy are irreconcilable, which side will you stand on? I'll stand on whichever side mommy stands on. Gong Jie smiled. If your mommy stands on your grandfather's side, will you stand on his side too? What about your daddy? Are you really not going to care about him? Yu blurted out instinctively, of course not. As soon as he said that, he realized what he had said. His face burned strangely for a while. He said awkwardly, I can't abandon daddy. Mommy too. They were a family, an inseparable part of the family. Mommy would always be on daddy's side, and he and Xiao Yichen would support daddy unconditionally. Where is uncle? Yu asked. If there comes a day when you're stuck in the middle, it'll be very difficult for you, right? Will you listen to him and deal with daddy? Gong Jie frowned and suddenly got up. He leaned against the railing and said coldly, I won't do anything to make my sister sad. Never will. If it really came to that, even if he had to abandon the whole world, even if he had to turn his back on his father and become his enemy, he would still stand firmly in front of Xianxia and protect her. Before they were born, they were a part of each other. Even when they grew up, they were still very close. It wasn't that he had no feelings for his father. Although he had been separated from Xianxia for so long, in Gong Jie's heart, Xianxia and Mu Qingqing's position was irreplaceable. If that day really came, he would still stand by Xiaxia's side. He had always been firm in his stance. No matter what, he couldn't change it. Uncle will definitely stand on mommy's side. Yu said. But can uncle really bear to leave the Gong family? After all, once he left the Gong family, Gong Jie would really have nothing left. I can. Chapter 3281. The cargo ship slowly docked at the port. Gong Jie got off the ship and saw Yu standing at the port, looking at the castle in the distance. He was hesitant to take a step forward. Perhaps he was a little nervous? In any case, when he set foot on this land, he did not know how to approach it. Gong Jie turned to look at him and saw him standing there motionless. He did not know whether to laugh or cry. What's wrong? Are you afraid of seeing your grandfather? Yu came back to his senses and smiled. Why not? Rumor has it that Gong Xiaoying is in a high position and his methods are ruthless. Even my grandfather should be afraid of such a prominent figure. You're afraid? Gong Jie did not think much of it. My little nephew is not afraid of anything. How can he be afraid of his grandfather? He walked over and hugged him. He scratched the bridge of his nose. Don't worry, it'll be fine. Yu finally revealed his worries. Uncle, if Grandpa really doesn't accept Daddy, what should we do? I'm still here. Gong Jie said, speaking of which, you haven't shown your face to the ITS special team yet. ITS was the abbreviation for Heaven's Eye. The Heaven's Eye project had a special team, including him. Almost all the top minds in the world were gathered in this team. They were geniuses who mastered cutting-edge scientific research and were elites in various fields. They were the treasures of the Hurricane Group. Yu had only interacted with them on the internet. The ones who left the deepest impression on him were the few chief designers in the special team. Are they also in the Hurricane Group? Of course. Other than you, all the members of the ITS team are stationed at the headquarters. Gong Jie said, I'll take you to meet them. Okay. The huge island was divided into 5 areas. Among them, the Gong family's residence was at the center. The other 4 areas were the medical center, the research center, the Hurricane Group's headquarters, and the Heaven's Eye Special Teams branch. The island was covered by an invisible and huge protective net. In addition to intercepting missiles, this protective net was also an invisible net. Even the most accurate radar would not be able to locate the place covered by the net. In addition, once an outsider invaded, the entire island would activate its defense mechanism. Although it was an island, it was not to be underestimated. It was once an important strategic fortress of M country. Now, it was occupied by Hurricane and heavily guarded. No one could get close to it. It was about half an hour's drive away from the Special Task Forces branch. When the car stopped steadily in front of a magnificent building, Yu alighted from the car and stared at the magnificent building in front of him in astonishment. His eyes widened and his mouth agape. So impressive. Gong Jia saw his stunned look, and suddenly felt that it was very cute. His interest was aroused, and he ravaged his pink and tender little face. I like the way you look when you haven't seen the world. What? Yu slapped his large hand away unhappily and protested, what do you mean by inexperienced? Alright. Let's go in. Gong Jia said again, I'm quite curious. What will those team members think when they see you? What do you mean? Some people still don't believe that you're really only 7 years old. Yu was speechless. What was so hard to accept? Chapter 3282. How old are you? 23. Yu rubbed his chin. Jelen? In the EITS team, he had a clash of ideas with Jelen. Jelen had once questioned his Sky Eye plan and said that it would not work at all. Moreover, he had listed many reasons why it would not work. Yu was not one to admit defeat, either. The reason why he came up with this plan was that he had thought it through carefully and had calculated it thousands of times. At first, this idea was born in the elevator. He and his mother were in the elevator together. The elevator malfunctioned slightly, and when his mother tried to make a call, the signal was blocked. She could not make a call or send out a distress signal. However, it was such a small accident that made him come up with an idea. If this world was also monopolized by a very powerful signal network, and if a transmitter was used to block the signal network, then planes would not be able to fly, communications would be disrupted, and missiles would not be able to accurately locate or even launch. In today's information spacetime, there was a signal network all the time. Then, did it mean that whoever controlled this network would become the master of the future world? When he proposed this idea, Jelen immediately refuted it. He said that it was impossible. However, Yu believed that although it would be difficult to implement, if this plan was carried out and improved continuously, the plan would have a prototype in the next 10 years. After it was perfected, it might not be far from being realized. However, his idea was too bold, and no one dared to agree. Yu spent the entire night designing a signal transmitter blueprint and submitted it to the Hurricane Group's Senate of Science. Jelen was speechless when he saw it, but he also agreed that this plan could be implemented. Soon, the Hurricane Group set up the DITS special team. The team kept recruiting new members. Now, the DITS team had 25 top researchers. However, the young boy who first came up with this idea had been absent from the research and development project for a long time. Some time ago, when Yueyao was born and his mother's wedding, he left the 25 team members behind to work on these two things. He had completely forgotten about the Sky Eye plan. When Gong Jia led Yu into the team's office, a man in a black shirt was walking toward the door in the 5-meter-tall office hall. He was holding an apple in his hand and had just taken a bite out of it. He was surprised to bump into Gong Jia. When did you come back to the headquarters? What a coincidence. Gong Jia smiled. He held Yu's hand and pushed him in front of Jelen. He smiled and said, Jelen, let me formally introduce you a child. Child? Yu raised his head and sized up the man before him. The man was tall and well-built, with deep-set eyes and brows. He was a typical handsome man of European descent. He had a head of beautiful golden hair, deep blue eyes, and exquisite facial features. He was stunningly handsome. This man was Jelen. Glan took a bite of the apple and saw the little lad standing in front of him, looking at him curiously with wide eyes. He returned the gaze and saw that Yu's eyebrows were very similar to Gong Jia's. He was so shocked that the apple in his hand fell to the ground with a thud. Omi. Chapter 3283. Just as Yu was puzzled, Gulan grabbed Gong Jia's collar in shock and said in shock, "Gong Jia, this child is, you recognize him?" "Of course. He looks so similar to you." Gong Jia thought that Gulan had guessed Yu Yu's identity. However, he suddenly lowered his voice and leaned closer to him to ask, "When did this happen?" Gong Jia was speechless. "When did you get a woman?" He seemed to have misunderstood something. "Does boss know about this?" Gong Jia's face was ashen as he said, "He is Yu Yu." Gulan was shocked again and didn't react for a moment. It was only when his gaze landed on the elegant little munchkin that he realized something. His mouth suddenly opened wide. "Hiss, Yu Yu?" In the meeting room, everyone looked at the cute little munchkin standing beside Gong Jia in shock. They were all confused. Gulan finally accepted this fact. He pointed at Yu Yu and said, "Yu Yu is really only 8 years old. This world is too crazy." Alice stood at the side and looked at Yu Yu with a scrutinizing gaze. Is there really such a genius child in this world? He can come up with such a crazy idea when he's only 6 years old. I want to do an experiment on him and see if his genes have mutated. Gong Jia immediately protected Yu Yu in his arms. "Alice, don't you dare. This is my nephew. Don't you dare touch a single strand of his hair." "Nephew?" Everyone was once again thrown into disarray by this statement. "Nephew? Jia, you're saying that Yu Yu is your nephew?" The group of people discussed animatedly. Yu Yu rolled her eyes. Originally, he had imagined that the office of the EITS team would be full of technology. Moreover, the researchers who came in and out of the office would be in neat suits with a solemn expression. However, the 20 or so people sitting in front of him were wearing white coats. Some of them were wearing thick glasses, and some of them were holding notebooks with messy hair. It was hard to imagine that these were the elite scientists of the Hurricane Group. What was even more unimaginable was that most of the Hurricane Group's sophisticated munitions blueprints came from these people. Yu Yu glanced at Galan, who was squatting at the side and looking at him curiously. He pinched Galan's cheeks and rubbed Galan's hands in disbelief, as if Galan was a puppet and not a living person. "Oh my God! What a cute little munchkin! It looks like a glutinous rice ball." Yu Yu slapped his hand away calmly. Slap! The back of Glenn's hand turned red. A certain tall man rubbed the back of his hand and said innocently, "So fierce." Yu Yu said calmly, "Glenn, your attitude towards me online is not like this." The EITS team had a special internet for communication. On the internet, Glenn's attitude towards him was completely cold and arrogant. Just as Gong Jia had said, Glenn had always thought that it was nonsense for a 7-year-old child to come up with such a brilliant idea. However, he was slapped in the face by reality. Chapter 3284. It was not that he did not want to treat Yu Yu the way he treated people on the internet. The main reason was that when they were on the internet, Yu Yu's choice of words and tone was very much like a mature adult. However, when he saw the soft and cute little fellow standing in front of him, he found it difficult to communicate with him in the adult world, using the way adults communicated with each other. His first impression of him was too deeply ingrained. He was a child, an 8-year-old child. Even though he knew that this child was very smart, it was difficult for him to interact with him in an overly mature way. Although this child had a cute and tender face and was wearing overalls, looking like a little gentleman, his expression was so mature. Between his eyebrows, there was no childishness that a child of his age should have. Instead, there was an extremely steady and imposing aura. His aura was very strong. This was the first impression that Galan had when he saw this child. Yu Yu glared at him coldly. Galan suddenly said in a serious tone, "All right, stop fooling around." Regaining his serious expression, he looked at Gong Jia and asked, "Did you have a safe trip back?" "No." Gong Jia said, "We met people from the Interpol on the way back. We were almost invited back to the ICPO headquarters for a cup of tea." "Was it that snow fox?" Yes. As expected. Galen's face suddenly turned gloomy. That woman is really like a ghost that won't go away. Gong Jia said expressionlessly, apart from her, all the members of the Alpha squad that she served in were killed by my mercenary group. Naturally, she could not forget me and hated me to the core. What happened in the end? She didn't have a search warrant and couldn't find any concrete evidence, so she went back. Galen smiled. You must have discovered her tracks long ago, so you purposely set her up. The ICPO is in political turmoil now. Everyone wants to be the chief of police. The power is divided and the power is dispersed. Therefore, even if you invite me back to the headquarters, you can't do anything to me. Gong Jia looked at Alice. Where's father? Boss? The boss left a while ago and hasn't returned yet. Gong Xiaoying had left a while ago because of Yun Shishir's wedding. He knew about Yun Shishir's wedding and was hesitating whether he should go or not. He did not tell anyone about this matter. One morning, he led a team of mercenaries and left the island. Until now, he still hadn't returned. Not back yet? Gong Jia was surprised and worried. Yu and Gong Jia looked at each other in surprise. He did not expect that Gong Xiaoying would not be on the island. He was no longer on the island. Where could he have gone? Gong Jia was a little worried. Because of his sister's wedding, his father seemed to have suffered a big blow. He didn't know where he went or if he was in any danger. Alice said, "Don't worry, the boss is fine. I received news yesterday that the boss went to the Middle East." Gong Jia was puzzled. What is he doing in the Middle East? During this period of time, there has been a lot of fighting in the Middle East. There's an order that needs to be negotiated. Galen continued, since you're not around, the boss went personally. In that case, when will he be back? I don't know. He didn't tell us the exact time, but I've already sent a team to protect him. Jia, don't worry. Chapter 3285. At the same time. The Bahamas. Yun Shishir was lying on a beach chair, basking in the sun leisurely. The climate in the Bahamas was warm. Here, there was no autumn or winter. It was very warm all year round. Since she was here, she did not want to leave. Originally, the Bahamas was only the first stop of their honeymoon. Mu Yaja only planned to stay for 5 days. However, on the 5th day, Yun Shishir had no intention of leaving, so he just let her be. After all, she was the main focus of this honeymoon. On the first day of their arrival in the Bahamas, Mu Yaja took her to try riding a white horse. On the second day, she woke up very early. Under Mu Yaja's special training, she finally learned how to ride a horse. However, the so-called learning was because Mu Yaja never left her side. She rode the horse while he held the reins and led her along the beach. Yun Shishir was quite confident that she would definitely learn how to ride a horse. Even if he did not accompany her, she would be able to control it easily. However, would a certain man let her go? Therefore, when Yun Shishir's 5th request to ride a horse alone was rejected, she was suddenly unhappy. You're looking down on me. Do you think I'm very stupid? Is that why you're so worried about me? I'm worried that you'll fall. How could I fall? I've already learned the little tricks you taught me. Yun Shishir did not give up. I also want to ride a horse for a round. Ever since I learned how to ride a horse, you've always been the one holding it. It's not fun at all. The man said, if the horse starts to run, it will definitely lose control when it meets an inexperienced rider. If it falls and hits its head on the ground first, it won't be as simple as a broken leg or arm. Yun Shishir stopped talking. On the 4th day, Yun Shishir was addicted to diving again. Mu Yaja had a diving permit. He knew a little about photography, so he took some pictures while diving. Yun Shishir saw them and yearned for them. It turned out that the underwater world was so fascinating. She had a yearning to explore all the unknown things. So she said she wanted to dive. Diving required a license before one could dive independently. However, if one did not have a license, one could also dive in a famous diving spot like the Bahamas. However, one would not be able to go that deep. There was a professional coach on the island. Xianxia first learned simple breathing techniques and ear pressure balancing skills from the coach. Then, she put on a diving suit and entered the water. Wuxia also changed into a diving suit, held her hand, and dived into the water. Xianxia had a deep impression of her first diving experience. The feeling of going into the water for the first time left a deep impression on him. Silence. It was as if the noisy world had suddenly quieted down. Other than the hissing sound of his breathing apparatus, he felt as if his entire body was floating in the water. This feeling was very strange. Originally, he was on land, and because of the gravitational pull, his center of gravity was very strong. It was also different from bungee jumping, where the feeling of falling into the air was unsettling. In the water, his entire body had lost its center and was floating. The heavy equipment on his back did not feel any weight underwater. He could not even feel the weight of his equipment. Chapter 3286. The resistance of the seawater was very strong, so it was impossible to be as agile as walking on land. It was Xianxia's first time diving underwater. Such an unfamiliar environment and feeling would make one nervous. However, once one got used to it, one would find it very exciting. Moreover, there were many mysterious areas waiting for her to explore. The coach said, 70% of the Earth's surface is ocean, so if you master diving, you can set foot in places that most people can't reach in their lifetime. This was an indescribable sense of accomplishment. This area of water was not deep. 6 meters below, one could vaguely see the bottom of the sea. Wuxia held her hand and brought her to the bottom of the sea. What came into view was a large area of breathtakingly beautiful corals. Some were in the shape of embroidered balls, while others were in the shape of tree branches. They swayed along with the seawater, looking exceptionally beautiful. Schools of fish swam past in groups. She couldn't tell what kind of fish they were, but they were very beautiful. Everything was so magical. Even when they returned to the shore, she still felt unsatisfied. She wanted to play again, but was not allowed. However, for a beginner, the first time in the water, they couldn't stay in it for too long. Otherwise, their physical fitness wouldn't be able to keep up. Xianxia suddenly realized in annoyance that in this world, what she understood, saw, and knew was still very little. In comparison, Wuxia was more knowledgeable and had seen this vast world. His rich experience was something that she could never hope to reach. At night, after dinner, Xianxia leaned on the balcony. From her angle, she could see the beautiful view of the sea at night. At night, the moonlight shone on the surface of the sea, making it sparkle. On the surface of the sea, some microorganisms floated on the surface, emitting a beautiful light like starlight. Wuxia hugged her from behind. He rested his chin on her shoulder and said softly, "What are you thinking about?" "I'm looking at the sea." Xianxia sighed from the bottom of her heart. "It's so beautiful." She was a little obsessed with the scenery, but she didn't know that the man behind her was also obsessed with the scenery in front of him. His large palm gently reached into the hem of her robe, stirring up the fire. She grabbed his wrist, but he was dissatisfied with her interference and gripped her waist, forcing her to turn around and face him. A certain man snorted and asked unhappily, "Is the scenery that good?" "Of course." Xianxia smiled and said, "Hubby, do you know? I've never seen such a beautiful sea view in my entire life. The beautiful scenery would really open one's mind and move one's heart. At the same time, they would sigh at the beauty of life and be able to see such beautiful scenery." Wuxia pressed his forehead against hers and gently pecked her lips. His gaze was affectionate as he said, "You've been playing like crazy these past 2 days. It's rare for the two of us to be alone. Moreover, it's rare for me to have the chance to see so many beautiful sceneries. Pausing for a moment, Xianxia suddenly curled her lips and said, I thought I might never see him again in this lifetime. Therefore, she was even more grateful to Wuxia. She was grateful to this man for giving her a new life and allowing her to see such beautiful scenery again. What nonsense are you saying? Chapter 3287. His words undoubtedly made her heart flutter. She couldn't help but smile. With you around, no matter where I go, it's a vast world. Her smile was really alluring and charming. Especially her charming eyes, it was as if there was an electric current in them, igniting a certain man's hidden desire. He hugged her tightly and bowed his head. Everywhere he looked, the details were unbelievably beautiful. Hugging her waist, he could feel her white and soft skin through the thin material of her clothes. Recalling the wonderful taste he had tasted in the morning, he began to feel restless. Just thinking about it wouldn't be enough to satisfy him. Hence, he put it into action. He pressed her against the railing, bent his head, and sealed her delicate red lips. Even without lipstick and lip balm, her lips were still charming. When he kissed her, it was soft and tender like tofu, but it didn't have the fishy smell of tofu. It was like cherries, but it was softer than cherries. It was like jelly, but sweeter than jelly, tempting him to go deeper. Wuxia desperately wanted to occupy more of her beauty, but he restrained himself, worried that if he was too rough, it would affect her experience. After marriage, his awareness and sense of responsibility as a husband was awakening. In the past, he had always been the master of the world in bed. When he wanted to sink, only he had the right to stop and continue. Plus, he was so energetic. Sometimes, after doing it a few times, he still didn't want to stop. Hence, only when she couldn't bear the burden, he was willing to stop and stop. But now, he knew how to consider her feelings. He desperately hoped that she would have a better experience in the midst of love. Therefore, she knew how to take his feelings into consideration. In this aspect, he was not as aggressive as before, rushing to attack a city and seize it by force as soon as his desire arose. Instead, he was much more patient, waiting for her emotions to stir before he went deeper into her body. Xianxia pushed him and couldn't help but say coquettishly, I haven't showered yet. Anyway, you have to shower later. Leave it with me. Xianxia was angry and anxious, but she couldn't dissuade him, so she let him pick her up and press her on the bed. Under the warm wall lamp, the man lowered his head and gazed at her. The corners of his mouth curled up, and his smile was extremely devilish. His handsome face was endowed with more and more depth by the dark night. Even now, when she looked at him, her mind was captivated by the devilish curve at the corner of his lips. She held his face and gently planted a kiss on his cheek. I love you, she said softly. A certain man was finally satisfied. He clasped her waist with his big palm and hugged her. Using this position, he could occupy her even more deeply. 2 hours later, after the storm had ended, he hugged her in his arms and whispered sweet nothings to her. Even though her body was drenched in sweat, Xianxia was too lazy to move. He wanted to carry her to take a bath, but she nestled in his arms and refused to move. His long black hair cascaded down his chest, accentuating his tanned skin, making him look even more seductive. Xianxia felt that just hugging him like this was enough to satisfy her. She heaved a long sigh of relief. While her limbs were weak, her heart was filled with happiness. Chapter 3288. Xianxia suddenly looked up at him. She rested her chin on his chest and her eyes were filled with a gentle smile. Honey, do you know? These few days have been the happiest days of my life. There would always be different feelings of happiness in life. She used to think that having you and Xiao Yichen was the happiest thing in her life. But in fact, for a woman, only being loved, respected, protected, and taken care of by a man, that was true happiness. She was very lucky to have met him and received such happiness. Muyaja hugged her tightly, but he saw that she was thinking of something and frowning slightly. He didn't know what she was thinking about. "What are you thinking about?" "I'm thinking," Xianxia suddenly sighed. I'm thinking about my father." "Oh." Muyaja responded but didn't say anything else. Xianxia suddenly held his big hand uneasily and interlocked her fingers with his. She said worriedly, "Aren't you worried that he will do something to you?" "Worried about what?" Muyaja didn't think much of it. There's nothing to worry about. To him, the most important thing was not the Jianghu financial group, nor was it his billion-dollar wealth. It was his wife, his 2 sons, and his cute little daughter. These 4 people were his reverse scale. If they touched them, he would be angry. However, Gong Xiaoying wouldn't pose such a threat to him. One was his biological daughter, the daughter that Mu Qingcheng, the woman he loved most in his life, gave birth to for him. One was his granddaughter, and the 2 little guys were also his grandsons. Even a vicious tiger wouldn't hurt its cubs. Moreover, he could see how eager Gong Xiaoying was to reunite with Xianxia at the wedding that day. How could he do anything to hurt her? In that case, he had nothing to worry about. He knew very well that if the Hurricane Group really wanted to deal with him, then the destruction of the huge Jianghu financial group was just a matter of time. However, he wasn't worried. Xianxia, however, was worried sick. Even though Gong Xiaoying was her biological father, she had never spent a single day with such an intimate man. She didn't know what kind of personality this man had and what he would do in a fit of anger. She told herself that she would leave some leeway for this man, but if he did anything to hurt her family, she would never forgive him. "I'm worried that he'll deal with you." After a pause, she continued, "I don't know how he feels about me or how much he hates you, but I don't want him to hurt you. Some things won't happen just because you don't want them to. A stubborn man like him won't be appeased with just a few words from you." "Yes. I know," Xianxia continued, "but I can do it. No matter what, I will stand by your side. No matter what happens, I will be with you. We'll never be apart." "Yes." Muyaja smiled happily and held her hand tightly. "No matter what, we'll never be apart." She chuckled softly, cupped his handsome face, and gently leaned forward to plant a soft and light kiss on his lips. Chapter 3289. It was said that a honeymoon was the most romantic trip in 2 people's lives. During the honeymoon, Xianxia threw all her troubles to the back of her mind. She did not ask any more questions and focused on enjoying the romantic honeymoon trip. After leaving the Bahamas, 2 of them went to the Maldives to relive the sweetness of the seaside. Before they got married, they had gone to the Maldives for a vacation. However, the feeling of traveling before and after the wedding was different. During their honeymoon in the Maldives, it was as if the entire sky was pink. They chose a waterhouse, a 7-star hotel. When they opened their eyes, they could see the endless ocean through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The blue sky seemed to be connected to the green sea, and there was no end in sight. The waterhouse in the Maldives was a luxurious house located on the sea. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, there was a balcony. There was a staircase on the balcony that led straight to the sea. They walked down the stairs and sat on the steps. Their feet landed gently in the sea. When the cold sea water submerged their ankles and soaked their feet in the cool sea water, they felt so relaxed that they could float. The Maldives was a paradise that made people forget to return. Here, lying on a beach chair, once they lay down, they did not want to move at all. After leaving the Maldives, the 2 of them flew to Paris to experience the French romance. She had thought that Paris would be the last stop. However, when the plane landed, she looked at the unfamiliar country. For a moment, a certain man gave her quite a pleasant surprise. Santorini Island, on the Aegean Sea, was an island ring formed by a group of volcanoes. Santorini Island was the largest island in the ring, and it was also called Thera. This was the southernmost point of the Kisraz Islands. It was only 96 square kilometers and had a population of about 14,000 people, most of whom were Greeks. It was said that this was the most romantic place in the world. It was not a lie. Muyaja, you. How long are you planning for your honeymoon? Yunshirsher did not know whether to laugh or cry. However, a certain man emphasized seriously, a wedding is a once-in-a-lifetime event. The same goes for a honeymoon. Why don't you take advantage of the honeymoon and enjoy the two of you more? As she listened, she was both touched and conflicted. She knew that this man had always wanted to make it up to her as much as he could. She also knew that this man was never good with words, but he had always done a lot for her. In the past, she didn't have much time. He also knew that in the future, the three children might not leave much time for the two of them. Therefore, he wanted to make it up to her as much as possible during their honeymoon. When the two of them ended their honeymoon trip, although they were reluctant to part, they were also worried about the three children, so they immediately returned. When she reached home, Yu was also home. He did not stay long in the hurricane group. He did not know when Gong Xiaoying would return. He stayed on the island for a few days, and Gong Jia brought him to familiarize him with some of the headquarters affairs. He was worried about Yueyao, so he came back as soon as possible. Naturally, he did not mention that he had followed Gong Jia to the headquarters of Hurricane Group. He was afraid that Yunshirsher would be worried. Naturally, Mu Yichen kept his mouth shut as well. In the few days that Yu was not around, the little guy had been tormented by his sister. Chapter 3290. Everyone says that nannies nowadays are unreliable. Some nannies are irresponsible and even hit and scold the children. Not long ago, I heard that there was a fatal accident in a high-class condominium. A nanny threw her employer's child down from the balcony. The child stopped breathing on the spot. Apparently, because she coveted her employer's wealth, she stole a few valuable pieces of jewelry. The employer's wife found out, but she didn't call the police on account of their relationship as master and servant. Instead, she ordered the nanny to stop. In the end, not only was the nanny ungrateful, she even bore a grudge. She hated the fact that the mistress exposed her on the spot and lost face. So, at night, when the master and mistress were asleep, the nanny secretly carried the child out of the nursery and threw her down from the balcony. Mu Yichen shuddered when he heard that. No one was allowed to touch a single hair on his younger sister. If his younger sister was abused like that, he would definitely break down. Therefore, even though the nanny came every day, Xiao Yichen was unfamiliar with many aspects of the house. Therefore, he couldn't leave the nanny's care. Even when the nanny was changing diapers, he would stand by the side and carefully watch her every move. The nanny felt uncomfortable under his stare and was even curious as to why this child was so patient. If it were someone else's brother, he would have frowned in disgust and run away while his younger sister was changing diapers. He stood by the side and watched carefully as if he was afraid that she would abuse the little princess. The nanny even kindly advised him that there would be some smell when changing diapers and asked him to hide in the living room. He refused. Therefore, the nanny was helpless. She really couldn't understand this child's thoughts, so she simply let him be. When Yunshirsher came back, she was worried that the three children would cause a scene at home. However, she didn't expect that Yueyao would become fair and chubby. On the other hand, Xiao Yichen had lost a lot of weight. Wasn't that right? In the middle of the night, she was awakened by Yueyao's cries. She got out of bed and made some milk. When the milk was cold, she fed it to Yueyao. By then, the sky outside the window was already turning slightly white. When she went back to bed and lay down, it was already past 9 in the morning, and the nanny came to report on time. At this time, he often didn't dare to sleep. He had to wait until the nanny left and he guarded the crib before he could finally sleep peacefully. At night, he would wake up on time to breastfeed, change diapers, and play with his sister. Taking care of a child was not an easy task for an adult, let alone an 8-year-old child. However, such a price was not paid in vain. Because Xiao Yichen had been taking care of Yue Yao for half a month, his sister was very close to him. Between Mu Yaja, Yu Yu, and Xiao Yichen, she was more inclined towards Xiao Yichen's embrace. Sometimes, when Mu Yaja was carrying little Yue Yao, Mu Yichen would pass by. When the little guy saw him, he would open his arms and ask Xiao Yichen to carry him. He would even kick him with his short legs and insist that his older brother carry him. At this time, Yu Yu would walk over and pretend to be Xiao Yichen to carry her. However, such a young child was able to distinguish between the two children so clearly. He didn't want Yu Yu anymore. He wanted Xiao Yichen wholeheartedly. Chapter 3291. The poor father and son pair, Yu Yu and Mu Yaja, had suddenly lost their favor in front of the princess. They were depressed, disappointed, and aggrieved. They felt quite indignant in their hearts as well. "Tell me, Mu Yichen. What did you do? Our sister doesn't want me anymore." Yu Yu complained to Mu Yichen. The latter replied nonchalantly, "It's no use being jealous. Our sister likes me the most now." With that, the tables had turned. Mu Yichen, who had suddenly gained favor, was now full of himself. Yu Yu gritted her teeth in anger, but there was nothing she could do. She could only brush her face in front of Yue Yao every day, change her diapers, and wake up at night to feed her. However, no matter how diligent she was, she did not seem to have won over much affection from her. It was as if her image had been fixed. Xiao Yichen's position in Yue Yao's heart was now extremely stable. Yu Yu was furious, but there was nothing she could do. Mu Yaja also tried his best to salvage some of his image in Yue Yao's heart. However, reality proved that Yue Yao's feelings for Xiao Yichen could not be broken by anyone. Yu Yu even mentioned this matter to Gong Jia, feeling wronged. A certain man, who was her uncle, heard about this and threatened to take back his position in Yue Yao's heart. However, Gong Jia brought another piece of news during this call. "Yu Yu, do you still remember Litsis? Why did you suddenly mention him?" Yu Yu paused and said slowly, "Of course, I remember him. Litsis was the boss behind the dark web. His dark web operated an extremely filthy extraordinary transaction that was unknown to others. Litsis was a Latino-Italian. In his early years, he was a businessman. After his company went bankrupt, he colluded with a few of his partners and set up the dark web to conduct illegal transactions. He owned a luxurious cruise ship. Every month, he would hold a grand party. However, such a grand party was not as simple as one would imagine. Every time he held a party, he would invite all the powerful and wealthy aristocrats from all over the world to hold a special auction on the cruise ship. However, such an auction was not a simple one. He was selling young girls. Through the dark web, his subordinates collected young girls from all over the world and kept them captive on the cruise ship. During the party, these girls would be dressed up and displayed in turns. They would be auctioned off and sold to the highest bidder. As for what to do with these girls after they were bought, it was none of his concern. However, most of the young and beautiful girls ended up as sex slaves, and their fates were miserable. Back then, the destruction of Daoist's dark net was also an accident. Yu Yu could not stand such a cruel auction method, so he used advanced black technology to hack into his dark web. He blocked his IP and destroyed his customer information group. Daoist was furious. How could he let such a provocation go? He harbored hatred in his heart. He threatened to teach Yu Yu a lesson. Gong Jia also knew about this. Back then, Yu Yu destroyed Daoist's dark web. Gong Jia knew how painful it was for him. During this period of time, Daoist has been very restless. You have to be careful. I'm worried that he will take revenge on you and attack you. Don't worry. Yu Yu's mind was filled with things related to Yue Yao. He could not hear anything else. Chapter 3292. A month later, Yun Shishir unexpectedly received an invitation to the National Drama Award ceremony. The National Drama Award ceremony was the most prestigious award ceremony in the domestic entertainment industry. To be able to win the highest honor, it meant a high popularity, a good reputation, and a broad national recognition. Popularity alone was far from enough. The previous Best Actress and Best Supporting Actress awards were all about popularity and capability. Even young actresses like Yang Mi and Lin Ji, who had good acting skills and popularity, could not gain much in such an award ceremony. In the past, the Best Actress award winners were all veteran actors in the entertainment industry. Most of the winners were older. These seniors had been in the entertainment industry for many years. Most of them came from professional backgrounds and had settled down in the industry for many years. They had many outstanding works and were extremely capable. Only those who were able to win such a prestigious award would be able to do so. This was the highest honor that many could only dream of. Therefore, when Yun Shishir received the invitation and learned that she had been nominated, she was a little surprised. According to the invitation of the organizing committee, her role as Qin Yuyan was nominated for Best Supporting Actress in the National Drama Award ceremony. They hoped that she would be invited to attend the ceremony. Yun Shishir was inexplicably pleasantly surprised. She was surprised that her role was so popular. Qin Yuyan was a villain who was hated to the core. She did all kinds of evil and had a vicious heart. Usually, she was not popular. Unexpectedly, she gained so much popularity on the internet. The netizens were deeply impressed by her superb acting skills. Nowadays, the netizens were very picky when they watched TV. It was no longer something that could be fooled by ordinary stars. Sometimes, even if one did not have good looks, as long as their acting skills were good enough, they would still be highly praised and popular among the netizens. Yun Shishir was a classic example. Her performance as Qin Yuyan was really bad. But because it left a deep impression on the audience and made them gnash their teeth in hatred, it showed how good her acting was. There were a total of 3 nominations. In the first round, the nominees were selected through the voting of the netizens. In the second round, the netizens also voted for the Best Supporting Actress on Weibo. According to the selection of the judges, 3 people with popularity and acting skills would be sent to the list of nominees. Even though it was just a nomination, Yun Shishir was already overwhelmed by the favor. Ever since that accident, she had disappeared from the entertainment industry without a trace. Mu Yaja had been very protective of her all this while. The media had been trying to find out more about her, but they were always blocked from doing so. As a result, she did not officially leave the entertainment industry, but she had been separated from the industry for many years. When she received the notice, she hesitated whether she should go or not. However, Mu Yaja said, "I'll go with you." She was a little shocked because she originally thought that he would object. All along, he had been very opposed to her working in the entertainment industry. To him, it was a foul and materialistic place that did not suit her. Therefore, even after her confinement, she never mentioned going back to work. She was always worried that he would get angry. However, she did not expect that he would take the initiative to accompany her to the award ceremony. Yun Shishir felt like she was dreaming. Chapter 3293. She did not expect him to take the initiative to accompany her to the award ceremony. Yun Shishir felt like she was dreaming. "Why? Don't you want to go?" "Yes, I do." She hesitated for a moment and said weakly, "I'm just afraid that you won't be happy. My wife has been nominated for an award. Why would I be unhappy?" Mu Yaja did not think much of it and said, "Besides, acting is your hobby. In the future, if you want to return to the entertainment industry, it's not impossible. However, acting can't be your main business. After all, we made a promise that no matter how busy you are, you must take care of your family. I'm just afraid that you'll focus on this job and return to work early and return late like before. Your daughter will be very lonely without you by her side." Yunshushi nodded, somewhat touched by his compromise. One had to know that it was not easy for this man to make such a concession. What he said made sense. Although he agreed to let her return to acting, she had to wait until her daughter was older, at least 2 or 3 years old, before she could return to the entertainment industry. However, this so-called return was not to make it a career. As he said, if she liked it, it was not a bad idea to treat it as a hobby. Occasionally, she would take on a few scripts and strive for perfection. Filming 2 TV series a year, or 1 TV series or 1 movie, was already very good. She would be satisfied if she could pick good scripts and challenge different characters. Therefore, after receiving the invitation and discussing it with Wuxia, she replied to the organizer that she agreed to participate. When the organizer heard that she was willing to participate, they originally thought that she would refuse. Now that they knew that she was willing to participate, they heaved a sigh of relief and beamed with joy. When they heard that Wuxia would also accompany her and participate in the event as a sponsor, the organizer was even more excited. Just the title sponsorship fee alone was 10 million yuan. Jianghu Financial Group rarely appeared in front of the public in the form of title sponsorship. This time, the organizer was really flattered. Therefore, they patted their chest and promised that they would definitely make this National Drama Award ceremony grand and spectacular. After it was confirmed that Yunshushi would be attending the National Drama Award ceremony, the media got wind of it. When they found out that Yunshushi had the intention to make a comeback, they were all so excited that they made a move. However, unlike before, when Wuxia protected Yunshushi, Yunshushi was interviewed by the media for the first time since that incident. The media was excited. However, before the interview, he had already informed them in advance that it would be inappropriate to ask too many sensitive questions. It wasn't that he was deliberately avoiding anything. It was just that some questions wouldn't be answered even if they were asked. In order for the media to interview Yunshushi, Qin Zhou gave them a draft of the interview in advance. The questions that could be asked and the questions that could not be asked were all marked in detail. However, even though the reporters had doubts in their hearts, they gladly agreed. Because in the past few months that Yunshushi had disappeared without a trace, the public was too curious about her sexual orientation, her activities, and her every move. It was said that because of that accident, she had lost her eyesight and was in danger of losing her sight. It was also said that after that accident, she was found to be pregnant. Therefore, she stopped all the publicity and activities and focused on preparing for the pregnancy. Chapter 3294. Some time ago, Wuxia had even meticulously prepared an eye-catching wedding for her. It was said that he had invited many distinguished guests to witness their sacred wedding. In short, there were all kinds of rumors about Yunshushi, but none of them were accurately verified. Most of the rumors came from experienced media personnel who had dug up information from various channels. Yunshushi did not know how these professional media personnel did it. Back then, in order to protect her and their unborn daughter, Wuxia had strictly controlled the situation. He had cut off all news of anyone who got close to her. Even when their daughter was born, the reporters outside the hospital waited for 3 days and 3 nights, but they did not manage to get a single useful photo. He had protected her so well, but these media personnel still managed to get hold of some clues. During the interview, the reporters threw out sharp questions one after another. After all, she had been away from the public for a long time, and the public was too curious about her. During the interview, Yunshushi walked into the dressing room. She was exhausted from being pestered by the reporters and sat in front of the dressing table. She walked over from the side. Seeing her tired expression, she could not help but smile. "Are you tired?" Shushi, does Chairman Mu agree to your comeback? As long as I don't get too tired and neglect my family because I'm busy with work, he won't have any objections. She laughed. "Why did you decide to make a comeback?" "I didn't say that I've decided to officially make a comeback, but if there are any good scripts, I'll consider taking them. This interview is just to coincide with the National Drama Festival." After a pause, Xianxia continued, if I can really win an award, it'll be considered as fulfilling a wish of mine. She lowered her head and looked at her reflection in the mirror with a lonely gaze. These 2 days, she seemed to be a little uneasy and absent-minded. When Xianxia passed the bag in her hand to her hand actually trembled. She seemed to have thought of something, and a trace of self-reproach appeared on her face. She blinked and tears fell. What's wrong with you? Xianxia couldn't help but worry when she saw this. She had a feeling that she was in a bad state recently. Inexplicably, he stared at her face in a daze for a long time. Otherwise, he would not respond even after shouting for a long time. His mind was always wandering, and no one knew what he was thinking. Are you okay? Xianxia said with concern, I noticed that you've been absent-minded recently. She shook her head. It's nothing. Don't worry. Are you feeling unwell? If you're not feeling well, I'll give you a day off. No. I'm just worried about the National Drama Festival. If something unexpected happens, it'll be over if you don't win the award. I thought it was something big. Xianxia said helplessly, just because of this? Actually, I'm quite confident about winning the award. You don't have to worry. Even if I don't win, I won't be disappointed. After all, acting is no longer that important to me. She bit her lower lip and looked at her, hesitating to say something. She really wanted to confess everything to her, but when she saw Xianxia looking at the mirror, she swallowed her words. After touching up her makeup, Xianxia returned to the interview room to continue the interview with another TV station. She sat in Xianxia's seat and clenched her fists as if she had made up her mind about something.